with our friends at NYPA and EPRI and GE. It's going to be a good discussion about some great technology they've been working with and other things for innovation over at NYPA. So let's bring up our panelists and we'll get into it. Gabe? Come on up. A little music glitch. Y'all have a seat, guys. Neva, Ali, and Jeff with NYPA and EPRI and GE. And we're going to let them kind of walk through some slides, talk about what they do at their companies, and then we've got a little video we're going to show after that.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you for having me on here. So I'm Ali Mohammed. I'm the Senior Director for Digital Innovation and Transformation Office. Long title, but in short, anything with respect to technology and innovation happens in my department. And I've been with NYPA for almost 10 years now. I have started as an intern, but now leading technology and innovation. It's a great time to be in the utility industry with electrification, with decarbonization that's going on. So this is just a great time. So,
there you go.
Oh, see the slide here?
The slides are behind us, yeah.
So technically, our CEO was supposed to be here. Due to flight cancellations last night, there has to be a change. So you're stuck with me for an hour here. So I'm going to pass the slide now.
We're in good hands.
So who are we at NYPA? NYPA is the largest, the nation's largest utility, public utility, state-owned utility that focuses on generation and transmission only, no distribution. So here you can see our grid, our transmission lines form the backbone of the electric grid. We own approximately 1,400 circuit miles, which comprises of at least 25% of the electric grid, transmission grid in New York. And up here, you can see a number of projects on the right that shows the investment that NYPA is making in transmission, whether we are upgrading our existing transmission lines from 230 kV to 345 kV or adding new HVDC lines. There's approximately 500 miles of transmission work that's going on today. This slide just shows the general area of where NYPA is, where some of the operating sites are and the administrative offices are. And this slide shows our generation facilities. NYPA owns 16 generating facilities that spread across New York. So majority of it, I would say we generate 25% of the electricity in New York, out of which 80% comes from hydro, which is renewables. So that's a good start for us when you talk about decarbonization and meeting your energy goals that the governor has set forward with Vision 2030, as well as the CLCPA, which is the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which we'll go over on some of those projects. We also own some of the small hydro plants as well. On the right side that you see is in upstate New York. The majority of our generation happens either on the top right by the Canadian border at the St. Lawrence power plant or in the western New York region at the Niagara power plants. We also own a small clean power plants that were originally as part of an emergency reaction to the load in 2001. 11 small clean power plants were built in 2001 to meet the needs in New York City for load. NYPA has been actively deploying new technologies over the past few years. We've been actively working on digital transformation, where we invested almost $3 billion in technology, where we have digitized, or in the process of digitizing end-to-end is what we call. That includes from generation to transmission to our customers, but all the processes within it as well. Now, with the governor announcing the state goals for decarbonization, one of them is meeting 70% of injecting 70% renewables by 2030. The second one is completely carbon-free grid by 2040, and also reducing 85% carbon reductions by 2050. Something similar to what California has, but those goals are definitely aggressive and ambitious. So in keeping those things in mind and all the investments NYPA has done, we came up with our Vision 2030 strategy. The strategic priorities include preserving the value of hydro, leading and becoming the transmission owner, the developer. Like I mentioned, we have 500 miles of transmission work going on. Decarbonization of our plants, which we'll talk about the project at Brentwood facility, partnering with the customers so they meet their goals as well, not just NYPA. And then the last one is reimagining the canals as well, which NYPA inherited back in 2017. Those are the strategic priorities. But the investments that we have made so far were the foundational pillars, which we continue to invest in. Those are digitization, ESG, DEI, enterprise resiliency, and resource alignment. So I'm looking forward to the discussion here, and I'm going to pass it on to Neva.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ali. So hi, everyone. Neva Espinoza. I am Vice President of Energy Supply and Low Carbon Resources at EPRI, which is the Electric Power Research Institute. So for those of you who may not be familiar with EPRI, EPRI is basically a collaborative, nonprofit R&D organization that looks across the entire energy system and really works on making sure energy is safe, affordable, reliable, and of course, clean. So we, on an annual basis, we're about $450 million R&D organization. We work with 400 different companies collaboratively, really trying to help solve the industry's largest challenges in a very proactive manner. And we're a global organization, so we work with 40 different countries around the world in order to help address and work on some of those problems. So we're really excited to be part of the conversation here today. And of course, we work very closely with NYPA and GE, really looking across that energy system and figuring out ways to enable that future. So part of the conversation here today is really focused around energy system decarbonization and one of the many solutions that will need to be out there in order to enable that decarbonization. And that's a huge focus of what EPRI is looking at, the entire energy transition. So when you think about the energy transition moving forward, decarbonization is one of many pieces of the puzzle. Energy resiliency is another important piece of the puzzle. And more, we're starting to hear a conversation around energy security. We see some of what's going on around the globe in terms of geopolitics, the impact that's had on our natural gas systems today, some of the prices of energy, and we really look at how can we solve these challenges in a way that we are continuing to maintain affordable and reliable energy as we move forward. And I think the Brentwood project that we're going to talk a little bit about here definitely highlights one of the pathways to enable that transition. So when we think about decarbonization overall, there's a couple of core ways and technologies that we think are going to be critical to enable the whole economy-wide transformation. The first is energy efficiency. It tends to not be talked about that much with decarbonization, but it is a huge piece of energy system transformation and decarbonization, and digitalization is actually going to be a huge enabler of energy efficiency as we move forward. The next is to continue to reduce the carbon intensity of the electric system, and then use that electric system for economy-wide electrification in places where that makes sense in an affordable and reliable way. But those three solutions alone will not be enough to achieve an economy-wide decarbonization, because there's a huge part of our economy that is really reliant on fuels. And they need some type of low-carbon fuel, something like hydrogen, ammonia, a synthetic fuel, or a biofuel, in order to continue enabling an economy-wide decarbonization when you think about things like heavy-duty transportation, high-grade heating, and some of our heavy industry type of parts of the economy. So all a really, really important piece of decarbonization. And we'll talk a little bit about one of the projects that we've been working on with, of course, NYPA and GE, which is a hydrogen blending project. And Jeff, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that in your introduction. The other thing EPRI is doing is we are pulling together stakeholders across the entire energy economy. And this is via a project we have called the Low Carbon Resources Initiative. So a huge shout out, some of you guys are in here, to the different companies that are part of this initiative. But this is one of the largest global initiatives focused on hydrogen, ammonia, synthetic fuels, and biofuels across that entire value chain to help us enable economy-wide decarbonization. So with that, Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Neva. I want to give a big shout out to Rick and Cloud for Utilities for having us here today to talk about this really exciting project. So I'm Jeff Goldmer. I've been with General Electric for over 20 years. I lead a number of our strategic activities around decarbonization, focusing primarily on low and zero carbon fuels, hence my interest in working with NEVA and New York Power Authority on this really amazing project. Before I really dive into that, I just want to recognize as we talk about the energy transition, it's a portfolio solution, and we've heard people talk about that over the last day and a half. We need renewables to grow at an incredibly fast rate, but even at the rate they're growing, it's still a small slice of where we get our global energy from. So we have to continue to look at ways to decarbonize other systems, whether it's gas turbines as an architecture, providing baseload power or flexible power, storage and hybrid systems. Nuclear is the largest source of carbon-free power in the world. We don't want to ignore nuclear. It remains an important part of the global portfolio. Touched on it a little bit in some of the earlier sessions. We can't ignore the grid. For a century, the grid was effectively unidirectional, source of power to consumer, and now we're talking about a bi-directional or multi-directional grid. Heard conversations this morning about, if everyone's putting a Tesla into their, their driveway, what can the local grid handle? And so it's really, we've got to think not just the transmission part, but we got to think about the whole infrastructure, T&D. And to Neva's point, digital is really an enabler that helps us manage this entire new system. So, in my world, being a combustion expert, gas turbines are kind of been my world for 2 decades. But as we move into this energy transition, I want people to think of gas turbines as like a Swiss Army knife. There are all sorts of really cool things we can do with them as we think about decarbonizing. We can change the fuel. We could go from a fuel that contains carbon like natural gas. We can switch to a synthetic natural gas. We can switch to hydrogen. We can switch to biofuels. There's a lot of global discussion ongoing about ammonia. So change the fuel you put into your gas turbine to reduce its carbon emissions. Or in certain circumstances, if that doesn't make sense, keep burning fuels with carbon, but take the carbon out on the back end. Because ultimately what we want to do is have the reduced carbon footprint for that electricity. In some places, carbon capture will make sense. In some places, it won't. But again, it's a portfolio solution. There is not a singular answer. So I just want to give you some highlights here about some of the things that we're doing in the space. We're doing projects both on the carbon capture side with the U.S. Department of Energy. So for anyone in the room or listening from the U.S. Department of Energy, thank you. We love partnering with the U.S. DOE. We're doing a front-end engineering design study with the DOE, looking at how do you retrofit an existing power plant with carbon capture. And we're very proud to be working with our partner, Southern Company, because again, it's not just thinking about it conceptually. What literally has to change in the power plant? What pieces, what components have to change? What's the impact to performance and OpEx and all these things that really matter? GE was also selected by BP to be one of 2 consortiums doing a FEED study for what would be a brand new power plant in the UK. The UK is very much focused on industrial sources of carbon, of CO2, because they realize that a huge amount of their CO2 emissions come from industrial clusters, and they have focused specific government programs at reducing the carbon emissions from those clusters. And so BP is put together what they call their net zero T side, but it's an industrial cluster, and they'll take carbon emissions from multiple sources and bring it together, but they need a power plant. So we're working with them on that. On the hydrogen side, I won't really go into all these projects. We're going to talk about the Brentwood project today, but to give you a sense that customers are looking to move the needle and make it real on hydrogen. We'll talk about Brentwood, but we've done similar work on one of our largest power plants at Long Ridge, which is a 485 megawatt combined cycle plant. Earlier this year, they ran 5% hydrogen into their gas turbine. And frankly, we'll talk about it a little more today. The problem isn't the gas turbine. It could do more. It's the supply chain. It's the infrastructure. If the one thing you take away from here is we need to think a lot about the infrastructure that's going to be required to do these kind of projects, to move the needle, whether it's hydrogen or carbon capture or energy storage, however you're thinking about changing the world from an energy transition and decarbonization perspective, infrastructure is going to be the absolute key. But last but not least, I won't go through everything here on the slide, but what I want you to think about and we'll talk about is when you think about doing a project like we did at Brentwood, you have to think about so much more than the gas turbine. You have to think about the entire power plant. What are the implications? What are the safety code changes? Where's the fuel coming from? Literally, where is it coming from? And where is it going to be at site? Where's the pipe coming in? Or where's the truck coming in? And there are things you have to think about holistically. And for me, those were some of the really important learnings from the Brentwood project. if you only think about the gas turbine, you haven't thought about the whole solution set. There's so much more than just the gas turbine, and hopefully we'll get into that a little bit in the conversation. So with that, Rick, I will turn it back to you, and thank you.
Thank you. I think we have a short video that we want to show our audience about the project. If you could tee that up. There we go.
Today, we bring you the exciting next phase of a transitional energy initiative happening right here in New York. The New York Power Authority will begin the Green Hydrogen Demonstration Project. A first of its kind, the project will investigate the potential use of green hydrogen mixed with natural gas to generate power at NYPA's Brentwood Power Station on Long Island over the course of 6 to 8 weeks this fall. GE's LM6000 gas turbine, which is currently fueled by natural gas at NYPA's Brentwood facility, is an engine similar to those found on the wing of a Boeing 747. This gas turbine will be used by the project team to evaluate different concentrations of hydrogen blended with natural gas at regular intervals. The team will assess the blend's effect on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and its overall system and environmental impacts. This is the first time NYPA will test hydrogen for potential use in electricity generation. The project's goal is to help create the blueprint for how New York and the rest of the world can fight climate change through decarbonization. This is a first retrofit of an existing power plant, testing the potential of substituting renewable hydrogen for a portion of the natural gas used to generate power. The findings from this demonstration will be shared with the industry and will inform critical next steps for combating climate change. Our goal? To find out how green hydrogen may decrease carbon emissions while ensuring reliability at power plants. The Green Hydrogen Demonstration Project is another example of the state of New York leading the transition to a clean energy economy, providing important learnings for the entire utility industry and a more resilient, carbon-free future for all.
That's a great video. Thanks for bringing that. Number one, I didn't realize you had 16 different generation facilities. That's pretty big load there. Why don't we start off talking about, obviously this is your project. Tell us what your two companies, what your hand was in the Brentwood project.
Sure, so I'll start. So as the video mentioned, the gas turbine at that site is an LM6000. It's an aeroderivative, so as the video said, the core engine is the same engine you'd find on many commercial jets today. So it's been an existing unit. Ali, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that unit went into service in, was it 2001?
2000.
And so our role was dual. Number one, we were supporting New York Power Authority as our customer in ensuring that the engine operated properly. Obviously, bringing hydrogen into a gas turbine where it's never experienced it or seen it before, we got to make sure all the components, what's the impact of them, and make sure that we understand that. But also then moving upstream of the gas turbine, what we supported them with was the system of how do you take the hydrogen, which is coming from a different source, and how do you blend that together with the natural gas to do so reliably and safely. And so, we had engineering teams supporting and working directly with both EPRI and NYPA teams on a regular basis for months, working to ensure that we had a very smooth, reliable, and safe project.
Yeah, so from the EPRI side, very similar to what you're hearing from Jeff, but really helping with the overall integration of the project. One of the big things we're trying to learn out of the project is, of course, what is the performance of the gas turbine as an outcome of hydrogen blending at different percentages. And the really big question that was kind of out there is what happens to overall emissions. So EPRI was responsible for a lot of the testing plans, developing those testing plans, identifying the instrumentation needed in order to monitor some of those emissions. And then, EPRI is a nonprofit R&D organization, so we bring kind of an objective view, an objective look at all of the overall analysis as kind of a third party. And then we take all of those learnings and we bring it back to our broader collaborative. Now, learnings out of this project, which will come out later this month, or is it September 1st? As of tomorrow, later this month. September 19th, the week of, those are going to be the types of learnings that enable others to move even quicker than this project did, which was actually really fast for these types of projects, and continue to build on those learnings to understand what these systems are capable of.
Yeah, very exciting stuff. Ali, why don't we start with you? Maybe share with the audience a little bit about the Green Hydrogen Demonstration Project. How does it fit in your decarbonization goals? And also maybe what were you trying to achieve with this initial pilot?
So as I mentioned with the introductory slides is the New York State's ambitious goals of reducing greenhouse gases 85% from the 1990 set point in 2050. And that's definitely one of the biggest challenges, and I would say it takes time to get to that stage, right? So NYPA early on decided, okay, we have been doing innovation, we've been working on battery storage systems, we've been working on other areas to help decarbonize, but looking at our existing plants, we thought, okay, if we can pilot a project where we can blend green hydrogen and help reduce those emissions go down, ensuring, and one thing that you didn't cover was the tolerance level of the plant. This has been in service since 2001. We want to make sure you're using an existing plant today that's in service and then blending hydrogen with it. There were some challenges where the first one that Jeff mentioned was the supply chain, getting those trucks ready for the testing for the pilot. And we did it in increments of 5%. But getting the skid ready with all the supply chain issues that's going on today, even getting a flange ready to be able to make sure that the project is successful was we worked towards all the way till the end of the project. This all started like a year ago, so over a period of 1 year, the testing was successfully completed, which, like Neva said, the results will be shared with everyone in the week of September 19th.
Tell us a little bit more about, in general, I guess, NYPA's goals for decarbonization. And I know you've got issues with the state and coordination with them. How does that work with the governor's office?
So as I mentioned, the governor, Kathy Hochul, had some ambitious goals with respect to decarbonization and all the other goals with respect to injecting renewables, 70% of it into the grid. From a strategy perspective, it's simple, but ask a power system engineer of integrating that into the grid, with instability. But we also have to make sure that while we are injecting renewables, we have to keep the system stable and reliable. So we developed the New York State transmission grid model as part of our Agile, part of Vision 2020, which stands for Advanced Grid Innovation Lab for Energy. That is a test bed for us to actually pull the equipment into the grid to see how the system would react before deploying these things in the field. So anything that we have done from a battery storage perspective or newer technologies with respect to whether it's protection and control, all that can be plugged into the simulators to actually look at and react and see how the system would react. So that's power hardware in the loop. We're also looking at battery storage, which I mentioned, and Alan is in the room here, who's leading the R&D department with Cadenza. It's an alternate lithium-ion long-term battery storage, which is up to 8 hours, and we're also piloting the zinc air project with zinc particles up to 10-hour storage. So we have some exciting projects that would help get to that and meet those objectives and goals. But hydrogen is just one of them. We've been working on several others, looking at electrification too. NYPA took the lead in New York to address the range anxiety that the users will have when they're purchasing EV vehicles, electric vehicles. So NYPA is installing 200 fast chargers across the thruway. If you look at the map, going up north from the metro region all the way to Buffalo, there'll be 200 fast chargers that'll be installed. Is that enough? No, but it needs to start. We took the step to make sure that people get comfortable moving towards the right goals. Those are some of the projects that we're currently working on, and Alan has a portfolio of 80 projects that he's currently working on that will all ultimately help us with achieving those goals.
It's fantastic, very exciting. From an EPRI perspective, what are some of the other promising low-carbon technologies you guys are investigating?
Yeah, so kind of looking across the board, of course, at low carbon technologies. So, Jeff talked a little bit about pre and post combustion, but so, when you look at the entire energy economy, there's probably not a full appreciation for what runs the energy economy today. And so if you look at energy use in the United States today, and the numbers around the world are generally the same, but 80% of primary energy today comes from a fossil fuel. It comes from a carbon-intensive source that is not managed or mitigated. Of that energy, primary energy, and that's things like the sun and the wind and the water, and you mine for coal or you drill for LNG or gas, right? So that's primary energy. You take that and you move it and you use it somewhere like an energy carrier. So electricity is an energy carrier. natural gas is an energy carrier, and you bring it to some end use and you use that. So from an end use perspective, about 21% of final energy today comes from electricity. When we look at what will that look like in 2050, in a place where here in the United States, we have a United States goal for economy-wide to achieve net zero CO2 emissions. So what would that potentially look like in terms of primary and final energy? Lots of different pathways to get there. There's no one option. You need all options on the table. What we see is there's a lot of foundational pieces. Energy efficiency, foundational. Electrification, foundational. Somewhere between 40 to 60% of final energy by 2050 will probably be reliant on electricity, which will be created in lots of different ways. So when you look at that, you have to keep as many options, as many technologies out there that we need, because what do we know? We know the goals are aggressive. We know the technologies needed to meet the goals for 2050 are not yet available, and they are certainly not available at the cost or the scale we'll need them to be. And technology takes a really long time to develop. So that entire energy system is going to really transform, and it's going to be around managing and mitigating carbon. Maybe abandoning it in some places, but sometimes we'll have a replacement, and sometimes we'll have to manage and mitigate. And all of the technology options that are out there, from a regional perspective, you're going to choose different things based on natural resources available to you, based on regional economies and regional industries. So we really push to drive and advance and accelerate as many potential technologies that can enable an economy-wide decarbonization. So, I mean, some of the key ones, obviously, we're talking about hydrogen, and people talk about hydrogen, and many times it's almost like when you talk about when you want to like order a soda and you order a Coke, but you don't really care if they give you Coke or Pepsi. That's kind of how hydrogen is to me. People say hydrogen, but they mean hydrogen and or it's a derivative product. It can be an ammonia, it can be, you know, a complex compound, it can potentially be a synthetic fuel that gets created from hydrogen when we think about hydrogen as a whole entire picture. And then there's also other key technologies. Carbon capture and sequestration is an economy-wide solution that is applicable to many, many industries of the economy, not just the electric sector, is really, really critical. And then, of course, our nuclear fleet. Our nuclear fleet is going to be continue to be very, very important. The existing fleet we have and extending that fleet, as well as building out a new nuclear fleet as we move forward. So really a lot of exciting technologies that are out there that are all ramping up on that acceleration curve as we move forward.
That's fantastic. What about some of your EPRI members? I mean, I assume they're doing parallel investigations of technology. Anything you want to share about that?
Absolutely. So, I mean, you're seeing a ton. I mean, you can't open any type of energy article without hearing a new announcement from a new project from somebody around the world. I mean, there's a ton of projects being announced. We're seeing a ton of money come out of the Department of Energy, and then other entities that are out there, whether they be state, local, or even private entities that are really focused on putting funding out to start pilots and demonstrations, which is really, really important of these technologies. Because when you think about a typical technology timeline, it takes 30 to 40 years to commercialize. But once you commercialize, you have to scale. So we need to squash that time down to much, much shorter so that we can start scaling these technologies. So you're seeing a ton of investments, and I'm sure Jeff or Ali, you guys might want to add to what you guys are seeing.
Yeah, I think we should at least recognize what's happened in the U.S. in just the last few weeks with the signing of the Inflation Reduction Act. We talk carbon capture, right? A lot of very specific details, but the bottom line is if you meet all the requirements, if you're sequestering carbon, the U.S. government will now subsidize that for 12 years for $85 a ton for permanent sequestration, up from $55. That's a huge tailwind into sequestration. You look at what they're doing for hydrogen. There is now a hydrogen production tax credit in the U.S. That didn't exist a month ago.
Yep.
Now the IRS has got to work through that, but that's up to $3. If you meet all the requirements, up to $3 a kilogram. Converting it to gas, that's $22.50 per million BTU. That is a massive subsidy into hydrogen. So we're starting to get all sorts of questions from our US-based customers because they now see that hydrogen in 10 years is going to see massive scale up, significant cost reductions, And we're getting a lot of questions about hydrogen now because customers are seeing that the government's going to really put their money where they've committed to do it. And it's a huge benefit for not just the power industry, because that $3 per kilogram, it doesn't matter where you use the hydrogen, whether it's mobility, heating, industrial applications, it's $3 a kilogram, period.
Yeah, well, and many times the hydrogen conversation, it becomes a chicken or the egg conversation. And gas turbines is a great example. Well, I can burn it, can you produce it, right? Or will you produce it? You know, if I produce it, will you burn it? All, you know, you have that whole thing. But so what you're seeing coming out of the IRA, of course, is hopefully helping enable that market. The other thing you're seeing is the Department of Energy coming out with things like hydrogen hubs. So through the IIJA, which is now the bipartisan infrastructure law, there's things $8.5 billion to enable hydrogen hubs. And the idea of hydrogen hubs is to really create these localized economies where you create a market over 7, 8, 9+ years that can be standalone. So the combination of these different things can be really powerful in order to accelerate technology.
And I think the governor, in New York, Kathy Hochul, is working with the neighboring states. So it's more of a regional plan. So we are working with the adjacent, the neighboring states all the way up to Maine, and 40 other technology companies to actually respond to the RFP. So it's great times. We see that all these bills come out and supporting the goals and the missions.
Well, what you guys are doing is really exciting, and we've had some great discussions earlier in the week about energy mix, right, and renewable energy mix. And I think it was pretty clear it's not going to be one thing fits all for our future of decarbonization. Kind of what do you guys see as how big is the role of hydrogen in that decarbonization future?
Go ahead, what
Flip
numbers
a
do you
coin.
have?
So,
Let's see.
so I'm going to take a global view. If you look at what's happening, across the world, you look at Europe, right, and was talked about in an earlier panel, the horrible situation in Ukraine, but what it's doing to energy markets in Europe. Europe is looking to become more energy independent, basically become independent of gas supplies from Russia. You look at what their plans are. They're talking about having to make huge amounts of hydrogen, but the recognition is they can't make all of it. They're going to have to start importing hydrogen. So they're going to be looking for a hydrogen import. Well, that means someone's going to be making hydrogen and exporting it. Is that going to come from the Middle East? Is it going to come from Australia? Is it going to come from the US or South America? So you're looking at what could be the beginning of a zero carbon or low carbon fuel market, the way we have a global LNG market today. I think hydrogen as a low or zero carbon molecule becomes critically important. Again, whether it's for transportation, whether it's for making synthetic fuels for the synthetic aviation fuel, was it for marine fuels? I think it becomes hugely important, and something we don't always talk about, that I know we've talked about, is when you think about grid stability and you think about where the grid is today, the grid effectively does rely on dispatchable rotating equipment, gas turbines and other systems that are highly dispatchable. In the future, we want those to be dispatchable and decarbonized. But they may not run as much if we've got a grid that's got 70, 80, 90% renewable penetration with energy storage. But you get a week in Southern California where it's cloudy every day, you will get a small amount of solar, you will have depleted your batteries. Now what do you do to run LA in the Southern California area? Well, now you need a dispatchable asset with energy storage. And does hydrogen or another low carbon or zero carbon molecule, which you can store for months, does that become your new energy storage system? And whether you dispatch it into a fuel cell or a reciprocating engine or a gas turbine, but does hydrogen or a fuel like hydrogen become the backbone for long-term energy storage?
Yeah, I have so much I want to add to that. So let me add a little bit before Ali. But so I want to touch on the hydrogen piece, then I want to touch on the resiliency piece that you talked about. So first with hydrogen. So we, in our 2050 net zero analyses, which we're also going to be releasing an executive summary for that the same week of September 19th. Big week, exciting stuff. But so that analysis says somewhere between, I think it's 4 and 14, somewhere around that X, the amount of hydrogen we need, depending on what other options are available. The more options that are available, the less you'll need as much hydrogen. Now, 4X, and that's US. 4X may not sound like a lot to you. I promise you it is. So when we think about hydrogen today, we're talking about this like it's an easy solution. It's not easy. So hydrogen today, just in itself, you have H2, is a low carbon fuel. However, the way we create hydrogen today is with a steam methane reformation or gasification process that is not carbon mitigated, no capture on it, 99+% of hydrogen, which means hydrogen today is a high carbon energy carrier. So we need to take all of the hydrogen we use today in the world, which by the way is a lot, and turn that into a low carbon energy carrier. That is not insignificant. Matter of fact, if you look at the world's hydrogen today, if we were just to produce that with electricity, which we don't do, but if we did, it would be equivalent to about 90% of the amount of electricity we used in the United States in 2021. So you're talking the scale of these things are huge, which is why it's so important that we're getting a lot of support from different organizations in order to push the technology forward. The other thing I just want to chat on real quick is climate resiliency. So you talk about cloud cover, and that's certainly important. But when we think about decarbonization and this energy transition, the other thing we need to think about is how is our climate changing? And when you think about how our climate is changing, you think about weather, right? And you think about, okay, weather events are happening, extreme weather events are happening more often. Extreme weather events are more impactful, right? The once in 100-year storm happens more than once in 100 years now. And something that people don't think about either, the duration of some of these events is expanded. 1 day of hot, 1 day of extreme cold, we can manage. 4 days of hot, of extreme hot or cold, is a very, very different story. So we are doing a lot of work to understand in this future energy system across different types of assets, how do you, one, look at retrofitting existing assets to be resilient in the climate of the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years? And then how are we taking some of that knowledge of climate science that we have and now incorporating it into designs of some of these things in the future? So these things tie together and they cannot be solved in silos necessarily. So
Sounds
sorry.
easy. Sounds very easy.
It's not very
So
easy
easy.
yet. I think the most important thing from a utility perspective is the supply of hydrogen. And that's going to be very critical and affordable too. Like if you don't have a delivery mechanism today and the infrastructure to deliver, how much is going to cost you? So NYPA is also looking, apart from hydrogen, we don't know where we're going with hydrogen yet. We did the pilot, we were successful, we'll have the results, we'll learn more about it. There's other utilities looking at it as well, not only from producing electricity, but also other areas that Jeff and Eva covered. But for us, what we're seeing is from our small clean power plants that we have, is how can we also, there's going to be an RFP out, it's already out now, is how can we use the existing infrastructure that we have and retrofit that to create like a large-scale storage facility, whether it's through hydrogen or not, but that's something that we're evaluating, is saying, okay, those are 16 that's in the city, and that's where most of the load is. How can we address the load there and using the infrastructure that we currently have today and retrofitting with large-scale storage?
I have one more question for the panelists from me, and then I'm going to open up to the audience for a few questions. We've got about 7, 8, 9 minutes before we need to go to the next session, so prepare your questions. So let's wrap it up. What do you guys see as sort of the next steps, and what are the challenges we have to overcome for our path to decarbonization? Kind of a big question, but let's go for it. You start, Jeff.
I'm going to go pick up on the thread Ali was talking about. It's infrastructure and supply. As Neva said, right, if we want to have a world where low carbon and zero carbon fuels and electrification become the backbone, we need amazing amounts of infrastructure investment. You think about some of the best wind in the US, there's no good transmission because no one lives there. So we have to invest in transmission to move that wind to where the demand centers are going to be. If we're talking about hydrogen as a backbone, whether it's for transportation, whether it's for synthetic aviation fuel, whatever it's for, we need the facilities. We need the scale up of facilities that make electrolyzers, bring the cost of electrolyzers down. For the NYPA project, one of the requirements is the hydrogen we used had to be zero carbon hydrogen, green hydrogen. Sourcing the amount of hydrogen we needed for the project, and they give NYPA's team a lot of credit, they did it. It was a challenge, not just because getting the source, but the volume we needed, and to do multiple days of testing put a real strain on our suppliers' ability to make it. We couldn't run test after test, afternoon after afternoon, like one day after another. There was a time constant, how long it took them to make that amount of hydrogen for us. And, we did a single 44 megawatt gas turbine, not a gigawatt scale turbine. We weren't powering a town or a city. So, we think about wanting fuel cell vehicles or sustainable aviation fuels or synthetic fuels. Doesn't matter what it is, we need massive scale up. We need our politicians to understand this. We need them to support us financially. We need, if you want to put a ton of wind out there and you want to move that electricity, you need a proper environment for permitting of the wind. You need permitting of the transmission lines. We need support from everyone to make this happen. This is not a me problem or you problem. It's an everyone kind of problem. We really do need help in all of these aspects.
Yeah, so I agree with everything you said there, Jeff. I mean, optionality is not an option, it's a requirement. So leaving as many options on the table is really, really important. Understanding the decisions we make today, like what's low carbon is relative to where carbon is. So we don't have to make zero carbon decisions today. We need to transition there. So what was low carbon in 2005 is different than what's low carbon today. It's different than what's going to be low carbon in 2030, and that is different than what's going to be low carbon in 2050. So we have to be mindful of the decisions we make today will impact the decisions we're able to make in the next 10 years and be really thoughtful of that overall process. And then global supply chain is huge. Global supply chain across the board for all of these new low carbon resources we need has to have take a really good look at it, and there's many organizations. The DOE released some reports in the February timeframe. EPRI just released a white paper over the past month, but a lot to really look at to understand that global supply chain and how do we scale that in the timeframe.
I would just build on what Nima just said, right? The global supply chain is definitely one of the challenges. For example, NYSERDA, which is the New York State R&D arm, just announced they approved 22 renewable projects to meet that 70% goal. So with that approval by 2030, we are still in 2022, brings us to 66% of the 70%. But if you can deliver the material on time and have the crews ready to install it, this is just one state that we're talking about. You're talking about all the other states and the world trying to meet those similar goals. So definitely global supply chain would definitely be one of the challenges. But as a state, as a utility, we see a lot of progress being made in New York and the commitment that we have. So we'll march forward.
Great conversation, guys. And I'm so sorry, Justin, your CEO, wasn't able to make it with that little flight difficulty. As we know, we're all having flight issues still right now. But let's open up for some questions. Do we have a few questions out there? You have to raise your hand high because I'm blinded by the light.
Hi, this is to Dr. Jeff. From a material science standpoint, is the same turbine works for hydrogen because the brittleness of the hydrogen and all those kind of stuff, is it something GE is working on?
So I'll just repeat the question so everyone can hear the question around material compatibility, especially if we think about hydrogen embrittlement in metallic components. It's something we're looking at. There is a huge industry and global view of what's going on. The simplest thing I can say is when it comes to some of our components, we'll standardize with a 316L stainless alloy. It's an alloy that's known to have better resistance to embrittlement. I joke, but you can go look at some of the reports published by Sandia National Lab. They're typewritten, they're that old, but there's actually some great work that's being done around the world with studies because we're still trying to understand a lot of the material science of what actually causes embrittlement in terms of the deep domain knowledge around what's happening at the molecular level. Where is the hydrogen actually going? How is it impacting grain boundaries? There's some great work that's happening. But fundamentally, people are asking questions like, if I've got a pipeline and I want to start putting hydrogen in it, do I have to put a new pipeline in it? Could I coat it with something? Could I put a liner in it? And so there's a lot of work that's happening. A lot of credit to the U.S. Department of Energy. NETL is funding and has been asking this question for a while. And so there's a lot of good work from the gas turbine perspective. It's not something that overly concerns us. Our hot gas path will never see hydrogen. I think it's an issue that, given the time frame we're talking about, it's an issue that the scientists and technologists in the world will solve this problem before we get hydrogen production at the scale where it becomes an issue.
Yeah, you're starting to see hydrogen blends in Europe, they've blended up to, I think it's 20% in certain distribution pipelines. I think the blending question in terms of material is going to be more focused on the gas pipeline infrastructure. Can you reuse that? Do you want to blend up to what percent? Do you need dedicated hydrogen pipelines? Who regulates dedicated hydrogen pipelines? How's that different from state to state? I mean, some of these interactions and integration challenges tend to be under talked about. but are really, really important. And like you said, the High Blend project, there's lots of really important projects looking at it.
You brought up an important point, right? In the U.S., FERC regulates natural gas pipelines. There's an open question as to does FERC have regulatory authority to manage a hydrogen pipeline?
Right.
It's an open question right now. So it's one I hope that the federal government is thinking about, because we're going to need an answer to who regulates that.
Interesting. Follow-up question. So implications are, of course, with percentage of the blend, safety, et cetera. Pipeline as well. We may have to make adjustments to the pipelines.
Absolutely. I mean, so, you know, hydrogen is different than natural gas. So you'll hear it's the lightest. Listen to Jeff's podcast. It's magical, and they talk a lot about this. But, you know, hydrogen's the lightest element. It's so great. It has all this energy density per mass, per volume. Not really. It's super small. It has less energy than a third of the energy, essentially, of natural gas within that pipeline, which means you need different pressures and flows in that pipeline to get the same energy. When you talk about different pressures, you're going to have different type of leak rates. It's a smaller molecule. It'll leak differently, whether it's within the material or through, you know, we talk about methane leaks. Well, hydrogen will probably leak more than methane. So there's just compounding questions that need to be answered, and that's why collaborative R&D is so important. So we thank you both for engaging in it, because we really have to figure out some of these, identify the questions, and then aggressively go after those answers.
Is it true that, or do you think it's true, your research showing that the higher the percentage of the mix, is it have a better influence on the carbonization? Or do we know? That's part of the testing.
So, you know, yes. So the higher the hydrogen blend, the lower CO2, depending on what you're blending it with, of course, right? But it's not a one-for-one. So when you hear we do a 20% blend, because of the volumetric energy density of hydrogen, a 20% blend is not going to give you a 20% CO2 reduction at the end of the day. And there's other co-benefits potentially, and we found that out in some of our testing. So other co-benefits in environmental controls, September 19th, that we'll be able to release some of those that need to be understood better.
Fantastic. How about some more questions?
Erdem Günay here. First of all, I want to thank you all and every individual contributing to this initiative for the good of our planet. My question is for Neva. As a core IT person, I might be asking a very silly question. Please forgive me if it's the case, but I'm really curious about, are there already smart systems? You mentioned about combination of energy sources in the coming decades. Are there already smart systems which can manage, like, if during the daytime there is sun and solar energy is distributed into the network, and then as soon as it stops and it's low on energy, then this hydrogen thing come into picture and take over?
Yes, sure. I'll take a first cut, and Ali, you probably have a little bit to add to this. I think the question is general about smart systems within the overall energy system to optimize things. So, you know, we've talked about in the past the integrated grid and two-way power flow. We're going to get way more complex than that, right? So we hear about grid modernization. I haven't thought of a clever term for it yet, but it's like grid modernization plus, 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 plus. So our systems need to become a whole lot smarter so we can optimize those overall flows, especially when you think about what we would call a shared energy economy. Right, when we are all connecting to this grid in a very different way, especially EVs now become a distributed resource potentially to use, and some of the work that I think you guys are doing at the Agile Lab tries to optimize and model that out. So Ali, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about it.
Talk something a little different. So you talk about smarter systems and how to control, you know, when are you using solar or stuff. That all depends on what the load is of the day and what are the available sources. So that falls under for us in New York, it's the ISO, the New York ISO, and they have to build out the integrated resource plan first. That's the step number one, is making sure they have identified and accounted for all the resources available today. Once that's done, then they can, looking at, you know, you're bringing in the mesonet, the weather prediction of how much solar can we have. So looking at the day ahead, the week ahead, looking at the data coming in from different sources will help you get there. So yes, we still need to get to that stage, and I don't think we are there yet, but together, being collaboratively working with different partners, we will eventually get there.
One more quick question, one quick answer, and that's all we have time for. Anybody out there? Any more questions? All right, well, I'm going to ask one more question, then we'll call it a day on this topic, and they're available, of course, for more questions. September 19th, exactly what happens and how do we participate?
Well, we can send you
kept
information to
mentioning the date.
distribute to everybody, but
Okay.
September 19th, EPRI has some big conferences going
Yeah.
on. It's our generation sector meetings and our low carbon resources initiative meetings. Monday evening, we have a cocktail panel discussion similar to this, where we'll be sharing some of the events. And then the next day, I think it's on Tuesday, we'll have a press release and an executive summary that will be publicly available.
That's what I was looking for.
Yep.
So stay tuned to their website, and as they share data with us, we'll share it to all of our contributors as well. Thank you so much. What a great session. Thank our audience here. That was great, guys. That was great. We're going to take a Welcome back. Our next session is the utilities role to zero-emission vehicles, and I am quite excited about it. We have two great panelists. If they'll start heading way up, Natasha and Carter from SCE and SDGE. Come on up, guys.
Oh, I like the music choice.
Good. That's a good one, yeah. That series just restarted. It's pretty good.
It is good.
Y'all have a seat. So we have a good conversation here planned with these wonderful people, and they're pretty important utilities, at least in Southern California. They have a lot of things going on. I'm going to let you both kind of walk through a little intro yourself, share with the audience, tell us a little about your companies and kind of what you guys got going on. Let you start, Natasha.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Natasha Contreras. I am the Customer Engagement Manager at San Diego Gas and Electric Clean Transportation Team. So we'll go just through a quick overview of just some of the programs that we offer today, and then I think we'll switch into some questions. So throughout the course of this conference, I've had the privilege to sit through a variety of panels, and I think there's an obvious theme that's emerging, and that is that the customer is at the center of everything that we do as a utility. And I think that's very much in line with the strategies that we build out at SDG&E for our clean transportation team. We've been in this space for about 10 years now. In 2017, we launched our first flagship pilot to provide infrastructure to our customers in workplaces, apartments, and condos. From there, we started scaling up and diversifying and trying out different pilots to see what sticks and what doesn't. We've installed charging infrastructure for various port tenants. That varies from electric forklifts to yard trucks to larger trucks. We've supported ground support equipment at the San Diego International Airport. We've worked with fleet delivery providers and shuttle buses. We also did our first installation of public chargers at 4 different park and ride locations. Combination of level 2 chargers and DC fast chargers. We've dabbled with some education and incentive programs, so we've actually partnered up with some local dealerships, provided education to their sales force. Obviously not about the vehicles, they know those things in and out, but when it comes to answering questions that come up from their customers about how do they charge the cars, what is their monthly bill gonna look like, we wanted to arm the sales force with all the resources they need in order to close the sale. We partnered that up with a financial spiff, so additional commission for more EVs that they sell, which worked pretty well, as you can imagine. And then from there, we just continued scaled up. So where we are today, what you see on the screen is our current portfolio of infrastructure programs that we offer to our customers. We're in our 3rd year of rolling out our Power You Drive for Fleets program, which is geared towards electrifying medium and heavy-duty fleets in our service territory. Anything from Class 2 to Class 8 qualifies. We're aiming to electrify close to 3,000 customers, right? And that includes things like electric forklifts, and that includes public charging hubs, and just thinking through the transportation corridors that we're gonna need in order for the goods movement to be electrified in our service territory. I mentioned our flagship pilot earlier. It was successful. In a period of about 2 years, we've installed over 3,000 chargers at about 250 sites. It was in high demand, and so we got approved for an extension of that program. So that is something that we offer today, is infrastructure for workplaces, apartments, condos. And then in April of this year, we launched our EV infrastructure, Rule 45, which is essentially a new business pathway specifically for separately metered charging sites outside of the single-family residence. So again, incentives that help subsidize the cost of design, construction, circuit upgrades, and things of that sort to, with a goal of accelerating transportation electrification. Throughout the journey of working with our customers, we have settled in as the role of a trusted energy advisor. So for us, it's not just a matter of getting people to participate in our infrastructure program. What we really find is that people come to us as a conduit of information. So we take it upon ourselves to point the customers to the right resources. And that doesn't mean just the charging incentive programs, because without the vehicles themselves, we don't have a program. So we have a whole customer solutions team that's responsible for meeting with our customers, answering all the questions that they have, pointing them to the right resources, answering questions about the regulations that are coming down the pipeline for our commercial customers, helping them plan ahead and forecast what is their operations cycle going to look like when they switch to electric. There's a lot of unknowns and there's a lot of information out there. So what we try to do is kind of centralize it and make it easier, right? That's our goal, is to make it easy for the customers. And with that, we have, in the last several years, established a whole brand. It's Love Electric. It's catchy, it's easy, and it's on everything that we do. That is our goal, is to not only convince the people to switch to electric, but make sure that their experience is easy and pleasurable. Like I said, it's the brand that we have on everything, on our website, on the resources that we provide to our customers. When we talk about funding opportunities, it's on all the tools that are available to our customers. We've also established an industry partner network, because one thing that we've learned is that we cannot do this alone. This is a transition that impacts everyone, and it's gonna take a collaboration between all the stakeholders in this space to work together. And so on a quarterly basis, we bring together the EVSPs, the OEMs, and how much we love acronyms at the utility. But we have discussions and we learn from each other, and we think of new ideas and how to, again, make the transition for our customers easier and more accessible. Rate design has a big component. Again, what is the role of the utility in this space? Obviously, rate design is at the forefront of what we do. We have residential EV incentive rates, and that's really how we try to explain it to our customers, is that it is an additional financial incentive, right? So when you purchase an EV, you qualify for a rate that's typically lower than a traditional rate that's available to all our other customers. And that goes for our commercial customers as well. We recently launched our EV high power rate that simplifies the process, right? So when we're meeting with new fleet facility managers to try to explain to them, it's really like signing up for a cell phone plan or an internet plan, where you can select a package that works for you depending on the consumption that you could forecast for your fleet. And that makes it easier, and it helps with waiving some of the demand charges, which I think is a big question mark and a concern for our customers as they're thinking about how this impacts and what their monthly bill is gonna look like. And then V2G, all the new rising innovative technology that's out there as we think ahead, just moving past just getting people in electric cars, how do we leverage them as resources to offload the pressure on the grid? So you're by no means expected to read this eye chart on the screen, but I think it's important to mention that the role of the utility is to provide access and equity to all of our customers, right? So what does that really mean? For the light duty segment, our residential customers, thinking about providing resources that are accessible to everyone. That means translating certain things into multilingual tools. That means getting out into the communities, whether it's through our collaboration with CBOs and making it accessible to customers that may not have means or channels to access that information through the traditional channels. For our commercial customers, it is offering additional incentives to those sites that are located in disadvantaged communities. In fact, all of our programs have specific goals that we try to hit above and beyond 50% and up of having all of our installations take place in disadvantaged communities. Transportation accounts for about 40% of greenhouse gas emissions in California. In San Diego, it's about 50%. So it is important to focus on those areas to equalize it. I think it's also important to lead by example. So earlier this year, San Diego Gas and Electric announced our path to net zero. And with that, it's practice what you preach, right? We're aiming to have 100% of our SDG&E fleet be zero emission by the year 2030. We're going through the transition ourselves. We're learning from the transition and are able to leverage those best practices and lessons learned into what we offer to our customers as well. And then I think building a company culture. So in a couple panels throughout the conference, I heard the example of leveraging your employees as a focus group, as the customer themselves, to try out new ideas, strategies, technologies, and I think it is important. We have about 25% of our employee force drive an electric today. And we're really proud of that, and we have built quite a big community around it, not only on campus, but virtually. We have an ambassador club, we have an EV club. We do offer financial incentives to our employee as an additional benefit. So we, again, try to practice what we preach. And so kind of getting back to the original question is, what is our role as a utility? I mentioned earlier, we really strive to be the trusted EV advisor, and that goes through consistency and the messaging that we're putting out there. So we want to make sure that the information that's on our web pages are about EV incentives, our pricing plans, our purchase options is consistent with what we're providing to our customers through in-person consultations, through our customer solutions team, through the events that we do out in the public. Again, it is a big transition, right? Purchasing a vehicle is a big commitment. It's expensive, and people are typically resistant to change, right? So it takes a lot of consistency and repetitive messaging in order to make them comfortable with the idea of shifting their behavior. We are, although we service about 3.5 million customers, our service territory spans from the Mexican border at Tijuana all the way to southern Orange County. So we consider ourselves small but mighty, but one of the advantages that we have in our service territory being fairly small is that we're able to host a lot of in-person public events. And we find a lot of value in it, and I think a lot of customers find a lot of value in it. We get a lot of positive feedback. So this year, now that, fingers crossed, COVID is kind of tempering down, we've been able to re-engage with the public events. And so this year we launched our very first EV Fleet Day, really kind of trying to make it a one-stop shop for our commercial customers in the service territory. So we brought our customers in. We had over 30 plus medium-duty, heavy-duty vehicles on display because we want to bust some myths that while supply chain issues have definitely impacted this segment, the vehicles are becoming available, right? We're starting to see them on the road, not only the light-duty vehicles, yes, Teslas in California are old news bears, but when it comes to larger trucks, I think people still have some doubts, and so we want to make it accessible. People could come in, talk to the vendors, get in, get out, seeing that they're actually available today. We had some panels, and it's important to get the education and knowledge out there, not only from industry experts, but I think we actually had a whole panel dedicated to customers that have gone through our program, that have lived the journey and talked about their experience, which I think is encouraging for other customers to hear that it's possible, and it varies from small to medium businesses to the larger players, right? So having events like that in the space are really important. EV Day is our largest event of the year. It's coming up through National Drive Electric Week, so if you happen to be in San Diego on October 1st, I encourage you to come out. We're really proud. It's the biggest event that we do every year. Up until COVID, we were very proud to hold the title of the largest EV ride and drive in the world. And the reason it's important and the reason we try to get out there and do ride and drives is, one, the market has changed. It's not so easy to just walk into a dealership, pick out a car, and take it for a test drive. They're just not sitting on the lots anymore. And so we try to, again, fill that gap and play the facilitator in the space. So we bring in all the makes and models, at least the ones that we could get our hands on, into one place, and the customer is able to test drive all of them if they want to be able, in a no-hassle environment. We don't have the salespeople sitting there trying to close a deal. It's just information sharing. And for the most part, it's always a positive experience. People love to do the ride and drives. EVs, if you haven't driven one already, they are fun to drive. They're quiet. They're really fast. And so that's always a good experience. When we talk about equity and accessibility, just last month we hosted our very first adaptive EV ride and drive. So we actually took several EVs and retrofitted them with hand controls to provide opportunities to do those ride and drives for those with functional needs. And so, and then obviously engaging with the media. So we acknowledge that not everybody can make it out to our events, whether they're on the weekends or just maybe not available during those times that we host them. So just, again, the continuous, persistent messaging, engaging through media, whether it's through press events or just getting the sound bites out there to get everybody familiar with the concepts that we're pushing out there is really important. So that's our spiel, and I'll hand it over to Carter.
And I've got a lot of questions coming up. You just get some good stuff. Okay. Thanks, Carter.
Thanks, Natasha. So first, I just want to say I'm really excited to be here in person with Natasha. We've actually worked and collaborated together for several years, a couple years at least, on the California Clean Fuel Reward Program. So it's really great to be able to meet her for the first time in person. So it's great to be here in person as well. I'm Carter Prescott. I'm the Director of Electrification at Southern California Edison, and I have responsibility for transportation as well as building electrification for our customers within our service area. So my team is on the program implementation side, so we're within customer programs and services within customer service. So I thought it would be helpful to just ground folks with who is Southern California Edison. We're one of the largest electric utilities in the nation. We're headquartered in Rosemead, California, so not too far from here, although mile-wise, not too far, traffic, double that at least. We've been in operation for over 130 years, and our service area spans over 50,000 square miles. We have 15 million residents in our service area, as well as about 5 million customer accounts. And in terms of clean energy, Natasha mentioned, hey, we've got to walk the talk. We believe absolutely the same thing at SCE. 50% of our electricity last year came from carbon-free resources. So we're really excited about that, and we continue to move forward with behind-the-meter solar and energy storage. So that's who we are. Let's see here. Okay. So at SCE, we have what we call, it's a white paper, Pathway 2045. It was actually launched, it actually became available last year or the year before, if I recall correctly. And it's really how are we going to achieve carbon neutrality as a utility by 2045. And essentially, Pathway 2045 is our North Star or roadmap on how we're going to get there. And so we know that we have to have 100% of carbon-free electricity retail sales by 2045. And then electrifying transportation is a huge part of meeting our state's GHG reduction goals. So we need to electrify 75% of transportation. So what does that mean? These are big numbers. So by 2045, we see 26 million passenger vehicles on the road need to convert to electric or zero emission, which is about 3/4 of all cars. And for medium-duty vehicles, 2/3 or 900,000, and heavy-duty vehicles, 1/3 or 170,000. So 2045 is really not that far away. I know folks think it's a long way away. We have goals that we need to meet by 2030, and I think that'll give us a really good indication on the progress we've made and what needs to be done in those last 15 years. So how are we supporting electrification? We're really supporting about 550,000 vehicles over the next 5 years to become electric. And so we do that through a variety of ways. Very similar to SDG&E, so we have vehicle rebates. We have our SCE Clean Fuel Reward, which was actually taken over by the California Clean Fuel Reward, so we share that program together as well as the rest of the utilities in the state. We have our SCE pre-owned EV rebate, which provides a $1,000 rebate if you're an SCE customer and purchase a pre-owned EV. And if you're income qualified, that rebate becomes $4,000. So that's really great in terms of serving underserved or disadvantaged communities. We also have low carbon fuel standard programs, which SDG does as well, which we're able to use that funding to deploy additional EVs throughout our service area. And then in terms of passenger vehicles, we've done several pilots. I think Natasha mentioned 2017 was your first. We were right around there in 2016. We have our Charge Ready program, so we did our Charge Ready pilot, and then we had an extension of the pilot, which really helped to inform our current infrastructure program for light duty, which we call Charge Ready Light Duty. And then, so Charge Ready, I'm going to go into some of our infrastructure programs in the next slide, but we also, for passenger vehicles, we have 2 pilots that are going on right now, Charge Ready state parks, and so it's really deploying light duty or passenger vehicle charging infrastructure at state parks and beaches, as well as Charge Ready Schools, which is installing passenger vehicle charging infrastructure at schools K through 12. And then I'll get into our Charge Ready Transport program, which is really our heavy-duty infrastructure, medium-duty, heavy-duty infrastructure offering. Again, we've also done some pilots in this area, Charge Ready Transit, which was buses to electric. And then at the Port of Long Beach, we had 2 projects that we did there to electrify rubber gantry cranes as well as yard tractors. So our 2 infrastructure programs that are the largest that are going on right now are open, available for customers today, and they're going to continue through likely 2026 with construction through 2027. So we have our Charge Ready Light Duty program, which is a $432 million program, and that's really to electrify or provide charging infrastructure to electrify passenger vehicles. I'll go through our make-ready infrastructure model in a moment, a future slide, but we offer infrastructure all the way to the stub-out or pedestal of the charging station. Utilities generally go up to the meter. We go beyond the meter to the pedestal, the stub-out, which I have a graphic. We'll show this a little bit more detail. But we also offer, rebates, multifamily turnkey solutions, because we understand that multifamily housing is another challenge to install charging infrastructure. And then a new construction rebate. We actually just issued our first new construction rebate to a multifamily property, which was really exciting last week. And so the target of this program is to install 30,000 charge ports throughout our service area. And we also have a key component of this program, which we call TE Advisory Services. And this is really helping customers understand from beginning to end what it means to electrify. So things can be complex. There's a lot of considerations, particularly operational impacts. And so we really provide support for customers to understand what that means to electrify. This program was launched in 2021, and I mentioned will likely go through construction through 2027. Our Charge Ready Transport program is our medium-duty, heavy-duty infrastructure program. This is a $356 million program. It's to install charging equipment, infrastructure, all the way to the stub-out, similar as Charge Ready Light Duty. But it's for medium and heavy-duty vehicles or non-road vehicles for fleet applications. And then we're targeting here with this program, electrifying almost 8,500 vehicles through the duration of the program. And then I will talk just briefly about disadvantaged communities in one moment, but this program was launched in May of 2019. What's really great about our programs, and Natasha mentioned this as well, we really need to make sure that we're paying close attention to underserved and disadvantaged communities. And one way that we do that is that 50% of our Charge Ready Light Duty program is dedicated towards underserved and disadvantaged communities, and 40% of Charge Ready Transport is dedicated towards underserved or disadvantaged communities. So we really feel strongly at SCE that it's our role as a utility to ensure that no one gets left behind. And everyone deserves the benefits of cleaner technologies, lower emissions, and many of our freight corridors are going through or around underserved or disadvantaged communities. So the make-ready model, I talked about this a little while ago, but really what does that mean? And so we want to make sure that we're installing infrastructure that's as easy as possible for customers to electrify. So generally, the utility stops at the meter, and in these instances with these programs, we actually go beyond the meter, which we refer to customer-side infrastructure, and it's all the way to the charging station or the actual charging station or stub-out. And so this includes not only the up to the meter, which we typically would do, but also the panel and all the conduit and wires really up to the charging station. So all a customer needs to do is install the charging station and we electrify it. So this is a unique piece of one of our programs, and it's one that many utilities across the nation are looking into this similar model. So affordability, I talked about disadvantaged or underserved communities a little while ago and how our programs are dedicated towards that. I mentioned our rebates for the pre-owned rebate. So again, it's $1,000 if you're an SCE customer, $4,000 if you're income qualified or participate in one of our income qualified programs. We provide, EV rates to customers, very similar to SDG&E. If you purchase an EV, you qualify for a time of use rate. Ours is called TOU Prime. So really, it's the benefits of having lower cost electricity outside of peak hours, which are between 4 and 9 p.m. And then we also are focused on away from home charging. So range anxiety is probably one of the biggest barriers that I've seen. And so folks really need to understand when they go to electric, are they going to be able to charge it? And so seeing charging stations out around as folks are, doing their errands or driving is really helpful for people to feel secure that, hey, if I purchase this EV, I will be able to charge it. We're also looking at, this is fairly recent, we're doing a pilot with the CEC on opportunities to integrate curbside charging. So we hear a lot from different cities and counties that say, hey, we have all these parking spaces, throughout roads in main areas. Is there an ability to actually convert them to chargers? So while you're parking there, you're able to charge your vehicle. And so this project is really focused on underserved and multifamily housing and communities with limited access to charging infrastructure or stations. And so this pilot is actually testing 5 to 7 sites across Santa Monica and Huntington Park. V2X or V2G, we actually hear lots of different acronyms for this. As Natasha mentioned, we have lots of acronyms in the utility field. So V2X covers everything with the vehicle. So one of the prime focuses right now, like the Ford F-150 is coming out. One of the benefits there is around vehicle to building. So you're able to or your home or your building, you're able to offset or power your home or a business or a job site right out of your vehicle. It's also really beneficial if you have a power outage or there's a storm. So really cool to see that technology coming out. We really look at V2X in basically 4 main areas, which are technology, consumer behavior, interconnection and management, and then compensation. So we're partnering also with OEMs to test different technologies to ensure that we have safe, reliable customer experience. And then we're also really looking at how do we need to change state rules or utility tariffs to accommodate EVs trying to participate in both the retail and wholesale market. So for instance, if you have a fleet of vehicles or even one vehicle at your home, you're using retail rates to charge that vehicle. When you dispense energy back onto the grid or in the future, not so distant future, you'll be able to do this, and you're participating in a retail market, very similar to a large procurement that's going to be selling energy to the grid. So how do we create mechanisms that are beneficial for customers to take advantage of this? We've looked at different pilots. We actually have some pilots that are still waiting with the commission that we're waiting for approval on, really helping to understand some of these capabilities and technologies. So really exciting there, and we're happy to see how this rolls out. So I think that wraps up my portion of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was great. Thank you so much. I think we're done with slides for now. Just had a few questions I want to ask you guys. We have a couple questions we planned, but you were talking about 25% of your employees have EVs?
That's right.
That's pretty impressive.
It is pretty impressive. So we were pretty ahead of the game. In 2015, we launched an employee initiative. We dubbed it Race to 500, where we launched our financial incentive that is currently being offered as a benefit to our employees. But the goal was to get to 500 employees driving EVs by 2020. We beat that goal. The financial benefit definitely helped, but by 2018, we already had 500 employees that signed up for this. And, they go through our group, and so we were able to kind of keep tabs on the people who our employees are that are driving EVs, and we really do look to them for advice. We want to hear back from them. I think that's really important. And so it was so successful that we decided to double it. So we're almost at our employee base is about 4,000 employees, and we're right about at 1,000 now. So we're getting there, and I think it's going to continue doubling, honestly, and I think it's going to accelerate. But it's encouraging, right?
It really is. And Carter, I was talking to your team in prep for this meeting, and they were telling me, because I'm in a condo not too far from here, and I was looking at getting charging in our unit. I said, well, you need to call us. We can help you from like A to Z. It sounds like really y'all are taking a lot of the burden off of figuring it out for your customers, which as a customer I appreciate. So let's jump into our regular questions here. What are you guys seeing in regards to vehicle to grid in the market? You know, the Ford F-150 sure does seem encouraging. What do you guys have about, what are you seeing with that technology?
Well, I will say that just 2 months ago, we officially went live with our first V2G pilot that we're really excited about. We partnered with a local school district and installed 6 bidirectional chargers to electrify 8 electric school buses. And so we actually have bidirectional flow flowing today. And so I think what's encouraging is that it is an opportunity, right? We are in the midst of a heat wave. If you've been outside for breaks, it is getting hotter by the minute out there. So during times like this, you know, we're able to learn, and if it's an opportunity to not only for the customer to potentially financially benefit from it, because they can literally store the energy on those school buses that are sitting there idle for most of the day, right? They pick up the kids in the morning, they drop them off in the afternoon, but during the day, they're just sitting there. So we're able to store the energy on there, and it has mutual benefits, right? So the customer is able to then offload the energy back onto the grid, potentially benefit financially from that. And for us as a utility, it's, you know, taking the stress and the load off the grid, and then also like helping with the renewable energy. Right now, California is really successful in this space where there's actually curtailments in this area, and so if we're able to find other storage resources, we're able to continue producing renewable energy. So I think this is just the beginning. I think we're focusing on the commercial sector. School buses are an obvious use case. We have yet to learn about how does the residential market play in this space. So yes, there's announcements about the Ford Lightnings, the Silverados that are coming to market. They're not available quite yet, but definitely I think, you know, the utilities, the forward-thinking utilities are looking to the OEMs and seeing how we can test this out, and what's the proposition for the customer, right? What do they gain from it? What do we all kind of learn from this experience? So.
I couldn't agree more. I think, you know, V2G or V2X technologies is going to be really interesting to see sort of where this goes and how it defines, you know, how we use vehicles in the future. I think, you know, definitely vehicle to home or vehicle to building are capabilities that we have today, which are really interesting. And I think it's going to be great to see where this goes. V2G, or, you know, two-way energy flow, I think at a large scale is probably, you know, 3 to 5 years away, just based on what I'm understanding. I think there's a lot of things that we need to figure out. You know, safety is one of them, to ensure that our customers are safe when they're dispensing energy back onto the grid. I also mentioned, you know, what does that compensation model look like? What incentivizes customers to participate in V2G? And then the last thing I would say is that, you know, it takes a lot of vehicles to be out there connected to the grid to make, you know, big differences. So as more vehicles are deployed throughout our service area and within California, I think it's a really great value proposition. You know, as Natasha mentioned, taking, you know, the burden off our load is a big one. And so why not? You know, it's going to help so much in the future, and I think it's really exciting to see where this goes.
What are some of the other steps utilities are taking to, you know, prepare us when everyone starts driving EVs? Because I think that will happen eventually.
Oh, in California, it's going to happen sooner than later. So I know it's been, you know, it's come up in several other panels throughout this conference, and that is a question. I think from our perspective, one of the keys is staying connected to the customer. So a lot of it, you know, we've been in this space for going on 10 years now, right? And so there's already a lot of EVs out on the roads in California, and we've been able to accommodate it thus far. And I think what's important is just building awareness of it doesn't happen overnight, right? Especially for our commercial customers. It's, we typically quote about 11 to 16 months from beginning of the journey to end, from the point that we get an initial call that a company is interested in electrifying their fleet to the time that their charging station is energized could take over a year, right? But that also helps us with a planning purpose. We can accommodate that if we're stay ahead of the game. So just staying connected and again, building awareness is gonna help us be successful. And then, the previous topic that we just talked about, V2G is gonna, and new technologies that arise over the next 10 to 15 years, I'm sure will help offload the grid, so.
Yeah, I think, really informing customers and helping them understand what it means to electrify is incredibly important. Natasha mentioned, some of the lead times for commercial customers to install charging infrastructure. It could be very complex. We need to understand how it impacts operations, how charging behavior will fit into the operating model, and just providing customers with, information, education on rates and different programs that are available to them, I think is incredibly important. And I always tell folks whenever I'm at a conference, it's really important for you to engage with your utility early. There have been several, instances where customers have made decisions on, a particular vehicle or types of vehicles without engaging the utility at all. And so it's really important for us to have that engagement early so that we can help you plan not only for your immediate needs, but also, what's in the future. So many customers don't just electrify, 500 vehicles all at once. Typically it's, in phases as they start to understand the technology. And so our job is to meet those needs now and in the future.
How are utilities supporting their less advantaged customers that need to move to EVs?
I'm happy to answer first.
You've been going first so far, so we're good.
I think there's various services that we offer, right? So even when you're looking at the infrastructure programs that we offer additional rebates to those in disadvantaged communities. I mean, if you're thinking about our Power Your Drive for Fleets program, and looking at our commercial customers, we're paying special attention to the small and medium businesses, right? That don't have the privilege of having possibly their own facilities and fleet department that can do a lot of the forecasting and analytics and planning. We're kind of holding their hand through that journey and helping to connect them with those resources to be able, so they're able to make informed decisions. And, whether that means phasing it out or planning accordingly, I think that's really helpful. On the light duty side, again, it's just thinking through some of the disadvantaged communities, right? We talked about equity on both sides and just some of the extended steps that we're taking, whether that's making sure that we have materials in different languages for people to understand the information that we're putting out there. Additional incentives for qualified customers. We're planning on future programs already, whether that means to bring down charging for public charging rates for those customers that don't have the privilege of installing a charger in their garage and qualifying for an EVTOU rate. Maybe they live in an apartment complex that doesn't have chargers, right? So then they would have to rely on public charging. And how do we incentivize them and make that accessible? How do we bring down the cost? Now that EVs have been on the market for several years, the used EV market is becoming more proliferated, right? So being able to offer incentives for those used EVs to bring down the costs and spike up the affordability, I think steps like that are really important.
I would agree. I mean, many of the same things we're doing at SCE, underserved or income qualified customers make up over 40% of our service area. And so it's really top of mind for us when I say it's definitely our position. We need to make sure that no communities get left behind. And that means no communities get left behind. And so our programs are dedicated, our infrastructure programs, both on the light duty and the medium duty, heavy duty side, are dedicated a percentage amount, 40 to 50% depending on the program, just focused on underserved and income qualified customers. I mentioned our SCE pre-owned EV rebate. I couldn't agree more with Natasha. As we start seeing more EVs out on the road, the second market or second purchase market is going to increase and expand. And so having that opportunity to help customers bring down those upfront costs of transitioning to electric. There's so many benefits for EVs. It's not just driving them and it's really fun. I will say it's really fun to drive them. If you've never driven one, you really should. Ride and drives are a great place to do that. But things like maintenance costs are so much lower. When I purchased my EV, as an example, I don't need to bring it in for service for 2 years. That was amazing to me. It's tires and brakes. There's just less, parts in the vehicle. And so I think helping customers understand, okay, it could be a more upfront cost, but if I'm able to reduce that upfront cost, think about all the benefits that I have for maintenance savings as well as energy savings. For their total utility cost and gasoline being included in that, charging your vehicle and using electricity is much lower than we're seeing gasoline rates like $6 a gallon. And so there's so many benefits for people to understand. I think it's really just taking the time and making sure that we have the programs and the resources available to help them.
Thank you so much. I want to save a little bit of time for some questions from the audience. Let me wrap up our portion of it, and I'll start with you, Carter. What do you think some of the key takeaways our audience should have from our panel here?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, engage with your utility early. I think that's incredibly important. If you could share that with others, that's really great too. And we talk to a lot of different utilities across the nation that maybe don't have a strategy around transportation electrification, and we're helping them define that and what that looks like, or providing resources and things that we've done. I think I would say if you're developing a strategy or you're outside the state of California, look at what others have already done, because I think you can learn a lot and be able to leverage a lot of really great resources that are already created and ready to go, that you can deploy in your own service area.
I completely agree. I think you can definitely, on the utility side, if you're developing your own strategy or looking to get into the space, it's important to learn from others that have been in the space for a while. But then I think it's also important to look at the data for your particular service territory, right? So not all service territories are created equal, and I think it's important to conduct surveys, look at the data, leverage your own employees as a focus group or a test case study, right? Start small. I think we all started with pilots, see what sticks, and scale up from there, I think is really important.
Fantastic. How about a couple questions from the audience? Can we get a microphone over here? Here we go.
We sure do. Who had that question?
I think that was KD right here. I could barely see him. It's so bright on here.
I know
Well, first of all, great analysis and great way of presenting. I was able to follow everything. Natasha, especially being an SDG&E customer. I live in Escondido. I try to make this question as less anecdotal as possible. Being an EV customer myself, I wasn't aware of the EV pricing plans. So was there something that you could leverage with your partnership that you have with car dealerships to educate us when we're buying the EVs in order to, not only, like Carter mentioned, take advantage of driving an EV, low maintenance cost and everything, but also the pricing plans, the tax cuts, of course, they talk about from a federal perspective, state perspective. So is there something that you're doing in terms of reaching out to the customers that way?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mentioned earlier in my presentation, one of the pilots that we conducted was to partner with local dealerships to provide them with the education. Part of that included making sure there's resources and materials that like actual takeaways, right? We have a pricing plan cards that could be available at the dealerships. We have since then continued the relationships with the dealerships. I will say it's been an interesting relationship with working with some of the dealerships, right? I think there's some that are more forward-thinking, and there's some that are a little bit resistant to change. And part of that is what Carter mentioned. There's lower cost of maintenance. That means less service, less opportunity for the dealerships to make revenue. But that being said, I think it's inevitable that in California, change is coming. So definitely leaning on your local dealerships and building those relationships is key. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that another opportunity is being here at a Digital and Cloud Summit, leveraging technology, right? So we have just recently completed our CIS upgrade, our Envision transition, and part of the information that we're trying to push is through my account, right? So when you're looking and evaluating your rate, we now do ask questions. Do you drive an EV? And it does push to you pricing plans that you may qualify for with, a certain answer. But to answer your question, the work never ends. Job security for me, I guess, because there's so much information that's out there, and we're going to continue pushing it out there because there's a lot out there. So, great question.
Any others?
We have a question over here. Stage right.
Yeah, hi there. This is Anupam from Tata's. First of all, great presentation, and I must appreciate the initiatives that you guys have taken, and it's really commendable. I have one offshoot question from here. Like, you are scaling up day by day, and the things will increase. So how the grid monitoring and the management and the complexity of it, how you are going to address that, especially taking into consideration that the low voltage visibility is nearly obscure for most of the utilities. So how you are going to tackle the complexity of grid management when the V2Gs come into place all of a sudden, and how the grid will cope with it?
Yeah, I'm happy to start on that one. So we hear this question pretty frequently, actually, what are we doing to support the grid and the technologies of the future? At SCE, we're investing almost $6 billion a year in our grid, and so the grid is consistently being better, more resilient. We're making investments in key areas where we see communities, customer needs, EVs being one of those. I do think it'll be interesting to see how things work in the future. I don't have the answer on how we'll work V2G with the grid, but I do think we have some really great opportunities, and as a utility, we're really focused on being in front of that. So helping shape what does that look like, and how technologies work with the grid, I think is really important to us. There's lots of different benefits, but we need to do it right. And I think time will tell how that happens, but right now we're really focused on not only meeting the needs of our customers today, but I mentioned in the future. So like we have integrated long-term forecasting where we're looking at here's what we need today, 5 years, 10 years out, and making sure that we're building infrastructure in areas where capacity is needed.
Agreed, and I think that's key, right? Being mindful of which circuits we upgrade, right? Because you can't just go peanut butter spread and upgrade everything. You need to be mindful because certain territories will be more impacted than others, right? We're a port city, and there's a lot of commercial vehicles that are kind of segregated in a certain area. So we know that's an area to keep an eye on, but there's new businesses that are popping up regularly, and they might be operating a fleet out of somewhere where we didn't expect before. So having that connection with the customers up front and making sure they're aware and include us in their planning process, I think we need to benefit from each other, right? So I think that's really important.
Great. Any others? Well, I've got another one. So y'all been in the thick of this. Any lessons learned from any of your other green energy projects that might help some of our other utilities maybe watching us online that they could learn from? You guys aren't new at this, so you've got some good expertise to share.
Yeah, I mean, I just start off by saying, leverage what's already available. I think folks can sometimes get overwhelmed with starting. Natasha mentioned pilots, great way to start. Reach out to other utilities, don't be shy. We're all in this together, and we're willing to help other stakeholders and utilities, across the nation, even throughout the world. So I think there's a lot we can learn from each other, and I would encourage us to do that.
Agreed, and I think, what we offered earlier is lean on your employees. Use them as a pilot site yourself. We have over 300 chargers that we've actually installed on our employee campuses, right? And there's a lot that we learn from even doing it on our own sites as well. So converting your own fleet, kind of going through the journey yourself, I think helps think like a customer and design the programs that would help the customers in return.
Any more questions? All right. Well, I want to thank both of you. It's been a pleasure the last month or so prepping for this session. Your teams are fantastic, and it's obvious how much you guys have developed for your utilities, and it's just great to see how you guys collaborate. It's important to people like me. I'm a customer, and it's nice to know how much you guys are working together to help your customers. It's very evident. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a break, but start back at 3:30 sharp with the CEO of EVgo and Jen from another person from SDGE talking about regulatory integration with EVs, and Greg White from NARUC. So we'll be back at 3:30 sharp. Thank you. session of the conference, everyone. Thank you for staying here with us. This is going to be a really great session with some wonderful people. We have Kathy from EVgo, their CEO. We've got Greg White from the Executive Director of NARUC, and Jenny from SDG&E. We're going to talk about implications of regulatory and cool stuff happening with EVs. And let's welcome our panel.
Wow.
Welcome, everybody. And both Kathy and Greg have got some travel issues, and they were kind enough to still stay on our calendar today over Zoom, so we can see them, but they can't see us. But welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Well, let's start off. I think everybody knows who you guys are. So, Kathy, we had talked about maybe having you do a little EV 101 for us, and you were fortunate to send us a couple of nice slides that we're seeing the cover slide now. So I'm going to let you get us kicked off if that's all right.
Well, sure thing. Thanks so much, Rick. So yeah, if you could go to the next slide. EVgo is a public company, and as such, I spent a lot of time explaining the charger landscape to Wall Street analysts. So, I thought it turns out that there's a lot that folks don't necessarily understand because they think of charging of EVs as just one homogeneous need. So what I thought I'd do is just spend 5 minutes setting the context for what I think is going to be a really interesting discussion about how charging and EVs connect with the regulatory arena that, Greg and Jenny are going to chime in here. Charging landscape. First part of it is the EVs. The speed with which an EV charges is set first and foremost by the EV. And you've got, probably over the next 24 months, we've got 150 new models of EVs coming. Some of them are teeny weeny, like these ones along the top. That'll go 3 to 4 miles for every kilowatt hour of charge they absorb from a charging station. Then you got the big ones that are coming, like the semis, that are going to require much more juice to charge and deliver the stuff that they need to deliver. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff in between. What's interesting is in the past couple of years, the batteries are getting bigger, the cars are getting heavier, so we actually need more kilowatt hours to drive a given distance, right? So that's again, as we're from utilities or regulators, we think about that. The speed with which a car can charge is determined by the vehicle design. So the car engineers, we have fast chargers. EVgo specializes in fast charging. Right now, the maximum power is one of the factors that the engineers prescribe into the car. It could be 50 kilowatts, kind of like the Chevy Bolt. The max power that a Chevy Bolt, the old Chevy Bolts, the new ones can take more. The old Chevy Bolts could take from 2 years ago was about 50 kilowatts. The max power that could be 350 kilowatts. Then, in addition to the max power, there's something called the charge curve, which is the amount of power a vehicle can receive during the battery recharge session. And it's not that top amount. So normally when a car drives in to charge, if it's almost depleted, it can start out at that max power amount, but then it tapers down. And why does that happen? Because the battery engineers are trying to make sure that the battery itself, which is the most expensive part of the car, is durable, that it lasts. So this is just important to understand, again, because even like when my husband and I took a road trip at Christmas, we plugged in, the car was charging at 200 kilowatts, and then it dropped. And he said, Kathy, something's wrong with the charger. I said, no. This is just the charge curve of our car. It starts off at 200, and then it tapers down. Okay, so only one passenger EV available today can accept 350 kilowatts, right? So GMC Hummer does that. The Lucid Air is next in at about 300 kilowatts. But the typical of the new cars that are rolling off the lines, the most they can take is 100 to 150 kilowatts peak, and then it tapers down, as I said. So, but that's going to continue to increase over time as the batteries improve and the car sizes get larger. All right, so that's part one of the EV charging landscape. That's the EVs. Go to the next slide if you don't mind. The second part of it is the chargers, right? So there are 3 different ways to think, 3 levels. Level 1 is basically the same plug that you plug your electric toothbrush into. And if you've got a car battery, you've got an EV and the battery is depleted, it's going to take, you can do it. You can plug it in anywhere you plug in your electric toothbrush. It's going to take you 35 hours to recharge that battery. The way it works, I've actually done that. It just takes a while. And we call it trickle charging, right? You don't need to invest any money in any new equipment. The second way to charge is a level 2, and that's a 240 volt outlet. It's the same as your dryer outlet, right? So it gets more power through more quickly. The typical use case for that is like people have a level 2 put into their garage. They charge overnight. So often workplaces are putting in level 2s, or parking meters are often level 2s, right? You're going to be there for 3 to 6 hours. It's a great way to charge. The cost of a level 2 charger is somewhere between $1,000 and $5,000 per charging port. Okay? Then you've got what EVgo specializes in, which is direct current fast charging, or DCFC. And that's the charging for on the go. Like if you're on a road trip on a corridor, if you don't have access to at-home charging, if you're a rideshare driver, if you're a delivery driver and you need to charge between deliveries, because you can actually get, depending on whether it's a 50 kilowatt charger or a 350 kilowatt charger, you can get your juice in somewhere between, you can get 100 miles in somewhere between 5 minutes and 60 minutes, depending on your car and depending on the particular power of that particular fast charger. Now, what EVgo is doing right now is we're only building 350 kilowatt chargers. So we're building more powerful chargers than any car except the GM Hummer can take. But that's because we know what's coming is more powerful cars with big batteries. So let's just take a quick look at the right-hand side of this chart here with these 3 donuts. In 2019, 95% of the million or so vehicles in America were charged at home, and a few of them are charged at work. Only 5% were charged with fast charging. But that's changing. That's getting, the Bloomberg New Energy Finance says the need for fast charging by 2027 is likely to be 35% of all of the gigawatt hours that are going to get consumed to charge vehicles. And by 2040, the expectation is that that's over 40%. Now, why is that? The first reason is that the purchasers of EVs are broadening. It used to be you'd only get an EV if you had an access to a garage. But now, many more price points, many apartment dwellers are buying EVs. 30% of Americans don't have a garage at home. Those people, because there's more choices, are starting to buy EVs. So that's part one of, and they need someplace to charge. They don't want to spend 6 hours charging, so they're going to use fast charging. The even more important thing is fleets are starting to charge. And fleets, like whether it's an Uber or Lyft car, which that's an EV, or a delivery vehicle, they are very high mileage vehicles. They're on the go. They often don't have time to wait between shifts or between deliveries or between rides. And so they need to charge. When we have a bunch of Uber and Lyft drivers on our EVgo network, and they charge with us 7 to 10 times more than the average retail driver, because they drive 7 to 10 times more. And every moment that a rideshare driver is not driving, he's not making money. So anyway, it's just important as we think about the ecosystem, we've got the EVs that dictate part of it, and then the chargers themselves that dictate part of it. And I guess, Rick, I think that's probably enough of a scene setter, and I've talked enough, and let's get into your good hot topics.
Well, that's fantastic. I was so excited to hear about these slides, though, I forgot to kind of ask y'all to introduce yourselves and your company. Kathy, we all know who you are, but will you tell everyone a little bit about EVgo? And then, Greg, I'll ask you to tell about your role at NARUC, and then Jenny over at SDG&E.
Great.
Yeah, so thanks, Rick. EVgo is the most expansive fast charging network in the country right now. We've got, we're in 37 states or 40 states, over 850 stations. And we specialize in that fast charging, particularly in urban areas. Now, we just made an announcement a couple of months ago that we're adding over 2,000 charging stalls to corridors with a partnership that we're having with Pilot, Flying J, and with General Motors. But that's what we do. We site them, we build them, we most of the time own them, and then we operate them to meet people's needs that are on the go and need a fast charge.
How about you, Greg?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Rick. I wish I could have been there in person, but I do appreciate the opportunity to join the conference remotely.
Sure.
So as you know, many states across the country have set ambitious electric vehicle adoption goals and are currently working to stand up policies and programs to support transportation electrification. The state public utility commissions are working with the state energy offices and the transportation departments to support EV rollout and in many states have been working together to coordinate on EV infrastructure planning, designing incentive programs, and launch policy and regulatory frameworks in the EV space. So NARUC's members are the 51 state public utility commissions mandated by state legislatures to oversee the rates and services of utilities to ensure that they're just, fair, and reasonable for all customers. The public utility commissions typically regulate investor-owned utilities for services such as electricity, natural gas, and water. And for electric utilities in particular, this oversight includes the utilities' involvement in transportation electrification, primarily regarding the siting and ownership of electric vehicle charging infrastructure that connects to the distribution grid and the electric rate structures for charging. So as you would imagine, this is a very active area. NARUC has a state EV working group that has been focusing on the issues coming before the states and before the public utility commissions. In addition, NARUC is partnering with the Department of Energy on distributed energy resources, interconnection, and the EV charging infrastructure is very much a part of that initiative. So that's just a very brief who NARUC is and how we're engaged in these topics.
Thank you, Greg. Look forward to having a little chat here in a minute. Jenny, tell us about your organization and what you do there.
Sure. So my name is Jenny Reynolds. I'm the Director of Clean Transportation for San Diego Gas and Electric. Although I feel like I'm here today not so much as an SDG&E representative, but sort of a utility representative. You know, there are a lot of problems, and I've met a lot of you in the audience, and we've had great conversations. There's a lot of problems that we're trying to solve to get through this energy transition. And I really appreciated, Rick, this opportunity at this conference to be here, to have those conversations as we work together towards those solutions. So although SDG&E is a very small utility in size, we're mighty in heart, and I really look forward to being part of this conversation today.
Well, thank you so much. Kathy, Greg, and Jenny, our conference this week has just had so many side conversations about EVs and charging, you wouldn't believe it. We've had conversations with investor-owned groups, city governments, multiple city governments that are building out the ability to support EV charging. So it was really a hot topic this week, and hopefully you can come back and be with us in person next year. But let's just jump into a couple questions here, and then we'll let the audience ask a few. But you know, obviously this is not a one-size-fits-all challenge to be done, but certainly a growing market with EVs for lots of different good reasons. But how can we have utilities and charging companies like EVgo and governments work together to build out the infrastructure in a more integrated, planned out manner? What makes sense for that? I'll let Kathy take the first stab at that one.
Yeah, well, look, we EVgo, we can construct a charging station on our own in 4 to 8 weeks, but we can't do anything without collaboration, right? So we collaborate really closely with the utilities because we buy our local utility power. We're a commercial and industrial customer, or we're a special EV customer if there happens to be an EV rate. The local utility has to first and foremost say, yeah, the local grid can support that. And as I mentioned at the intro, we're building 350 kilowatt chargers now, and we're siting 6 stalls at a station because that's better for driver experiences to have more stalls in one location. That almost always requires a service upgrade by the local utility. And if it requires a service upgrade, the utility has to be involved in the design and making sure that not only that the design will work, but also they need to then order a transformer or to be put onto the site to make sure that the grid stays whole. They also then need, if they're putting some equipment there, they probably need to get an easement or an access agreement from the landlord of that property. And again, that's not EVgo. EVgo just leases parking spaces. So by necessity, we all need to be working together on that part of it. Further, the local government authority the AHJs have to say, yep, we like the look of it. We support it going in. And so that's another part of the puzzle with us working with the local government authorities. And after we build it, then the utility has to come back again and inspect it to make sure that it's safe for use, for that ratepayers can drive up, the drivers can drive up, and it's all good. So look, nothing can happen without the strong collaboration between all of these players. As I mentioned, it takes us only 4 to 8 weeks to construct the station because we've been doing it for 10 years and we know what we're doing. But at the moment, it takes somewhere between 12 and 18 months to go from the idea of having a fast charging station built somewhere and getting it energized for EV drivers to be able to use. What we're all hopeful for is that with more experience and more collaboration and more kind of just lessons in doing, that 12 to 18 months can maybe get collapsed down to 6 months, because goodness knows we need much more charging infrastructure for all of those EVs that are coming.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, you know, Kathy, I think it was really good how you likened EVgo to a commercial industrial customer. Because oftentimes we're talking about electric vehicles and we think about it as it's these separate electrons that are going to just fuel this future. But the reality is the utility every day is supplying our large business customers with megawatts of load. And when they do that, they need to come to us early, they need a partner, and we get it to them. Like, that's our bread and butter, right? The utility is very good at providing power. And I think if you were here in the last panel, they both said, Carter and Natasha both said, you know, engage your utility early, partner with them early, communicate with them early. And that's because of all the things that we're saying now. The timeline to get these large infrastructure projects, these megawatts online, it does take a lot. It takes a village, it takes your governments, it takes your utilities, it takes your customers. But I also just want to demystify it. That's not just for EV charging. That's for any time a business customer wants to add a lot of load. And so they go through the same process that anyone goes through. And I think that's where, as a state in California, we're trying to figure out how do we get the electric load and sort of how do we prioritize that along with all the other things, hospitals wanting more load, you know, Qualcomm or other industrial customers wanting more load. So it takes a lot.
That's a great point. Greg, you want to add anything to the conversation?
Yeah, just really to add to what both of my colleagues said, you know, it's really communication, participation in working groups and proceedings, collaborative planning, and that's really where the commissions, the public utility commissions, have an important role in convening those groups. So NARUC published an EV trends paper in 2019 that highlighted non-adjudicative stakeholder engagement as a key tool for charting a path forward for states to align their policy and regulatory goals. Many state commissions have established stakeholder working groups where utilities and other stakeholders can access key and discuss key topics and navigate the challenging issues. Right at the moment, NARUC is working with the National Association of State Energy Officials, along with the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, to write a paper filled with practices around engagement across the state agencies, and we believe that this will be crucial for implementing the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as the Inflation Recovery Act and the grants and funding that are going to be provided through those acts. So really, it's the collaboration is so critical.
Thank you, sir. Let's move into another question for you guys. So what's working and what isn't working today in terms of the approval process? And where will it get even harder with scale? I'll let Kathy go again first.
Look, for us, it just takes time. There's nothing that's getting disapproved. And again, what we're doing is getting sign off from utilities that the grid can handle it. The utilities are inherently excited about electrification of transportation.
Sure.
It's just a matter of ensuring that they've got the system in place so that as charging stations come online, everybody else's lights are staying on. And again, it's just planning. So for us, you know, I think that's fine. I mean, I would be interested in hearing from both Jenny and Greg on, like, when a utility is seeking to get permission to rate base some of those investments associated with making sure that the grid is all good. Like, if those processes, if electrification of transportation is getting any special sort of dispensation, or is it fast-tracked, or is it on the same path, just because there is all of this coming out of the IRA and NEVI and all of this federal infrastructure, there are some very, very ambitious timetables where I know that the utilities are excited, but if they can't go ahead and place orders for these system upgrades if they are not going to be able to recover the investment somehow. And there is a role for the regulators in that conversation, I think, right?
Great point. Jenny, why don't you take it from there?
No, 100%. And I think that I'll bring up a very boring topic, but it's really what has made the utilities very good at our job, which is forecasting. And so we rely on organizations like the California Energy Commission to do forecasting for us. And we've been able to meet the load today. Edison has the lights on because they met this load and they knew it was coming before we turned the lights on. And that's why we don't have rolling blackouts, and that's why the electric grid doesn't shut down. And so we have to rely on our government and our agencies to tell us how they're forecasting the electric grid in the future, and that's what we can build out. I'm sure you can imagine if we gold-plated the system and built out for this really exotic future, your rates and the rate base, it would go up, and nobody wants that. The utility doesn't want that, customers don't want that, it's not good for California. And so it's this balance between what will the commission allow us to build ahead of it coming. Now with business, and that's what we've talked a lot about here, is business is a little bit easier to predict, right? Because the business customers come to us, they do a process. It's residential load, it's sneaky residential load that sneaks in there because they don't have to go through the utility and tell us that they're adding an EV to their home, or necessarily unless they're doing an interconnection. And so that's where we need really good forecasting and really good planning to help the utility build right size infrastructure. Everybody's worried about, can we build it? I'm here to tell you, we can build it. That is not the problem. The problem, so yeah, clap if you want, we can build it.
Absolutely. Yay.
The problem is building it with the right cost, at the right pace, in the right way, and that takes predictive analytics, and I think we're just scratching the surface there, and it's, again, we talk about partnerships, and Kathy, I see your head nodding if you agree, but it's going to take a lot of people saying, hey, this is what California wants to do, then we've got to get ready and do it.
Greg, you want to add in?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have more to add,
Okay.
other than, there's various levels of approvals here that we may be talking about. Some might be the make-ready work that the utilities need to do. In terms of specific, let's say rate design, let's say a utility is going to be rate basing some of the investment that they're making. Those are typically going to be done under rate case proceedings before the Public Utility Commissions. There are many states that have timeframes under which such a proceeding can take place. I was a commissioner in Michigan. We had to decide utility rate cases in 6 months. And so, unfortunately, these are not, necessarily nimble proceedings, which really goes back to the points that were being made earlier, how important it is to have these conversations in place in advance and have the stakeholders engaged so that things aren't getting tied up by a regulatory proceeding, which we would try to narrow the discussion to simply something like the rate design for the chargers.
Thank you.
Rick, if I could add one more thought just based on something that Jenny, which is one of the things that we've tried to do at EVgo is provide the utility with our map for the next 18 to 24 months. What we do is we take a look at the publicly available information on the grid infrastructure, the local grid infrastructure I'm talking. We are working with site hosts all the time, Whole Foods, Kroger, Safeway, all of the Target, all of those guys that say, I want a charging station, I want a charging station. We do our best to overlay places on the map with the appetite of site hosts to have that amenity at their location. And we give it to the utility and say, okay, here's what we're thinking for the next 18 to 24 months. Is this giving you any heartburn? And that's been really, really useful because they say, oh, okay, to the extent that we can do this set first and delay these guys until we finish this other project, we're like, yeah, that's fine. But again, when in the old days, I've been at EVgo since 2017, in the old days, we would just sort of drop our plan into the utility, fold our arms and wait for do we have approval? Do we have approval? Or can we go ahead? And it wasn't as collaborative. And we're now actually, by giving the utility a line of sight into what our plans are, and we've got some pretty sophisticated mapping that we built into our network planning tools at EVgo, we hope that we're actually making it easier for the utility to be comfortable with all of this cool infrastructure that's needing to get built to serve all of these EVs that are coming.
Yeah, and if I can just add, Kathy, I'm not just saying this because you're on the panel with me, but EVgo has been a great customer and a great partner of ours in our utility space. So San Diego Gas and Electric really values the level of effort and care that your employees and how you think through. It is a great example of collaboration and partnership. I do want to just throw something out there as we talk about rate design. So I think when EVs were first getting started, we thought about we need specific EV rates. In fact, the commission just approved a subpilot 2018 ruling with this in mind, right? So that utilities can make specific EV rates. But I would also say that as we look about electrification of vehicles, we're also looking at electrification of buildings. And an electron is an electron is an electron, regardless of what it's fueling. And so at SDG&E, we're also contemplating these technology neutral rates, which incentivize the electrification process at an affordable rate, but doesn't really make you have to decide, well, is it my water heater that I'm going to electrify or my EV? But as a consumer and as a customer, allowing you to just electrify what makes sense for you in your fuel station choices. Because you all have choices, right? What fuel do you want to fuel your car? What fuel do you want to fuel your water heater, your AC? And these are all choices as consumers that we as a utility want to provide you, but we want to make sure we can do it in a rate that makes sense and isn't maybe picking favorite electrons. I mean, I personally like, as Clean Transportation Director, I like the electrons that fuel our EVs, but I'm sure others are appreciative of electrons that fuel other things as well.
Makes sense.
One other thing that we've actually worked with the California utilities on that again, the audience members might appreciate is time of use rates. So, just like it kind of almost in contrast to an electron as an electron, the time that the electron needs to get put into a device varies, like the cost to the system. So in collaboration with the California Public Utility Commission and the investor-owned utilities in California, EVgo has put in place in California time of use rates. So that we would be, and again, at their behest, because it said we're excited about transportation electrification, but we're really excited about having EVs charge in these off-peak times. We're a little less excited about them charging in these on-peak times. And we said, we can do a whole lot of that with our own rate design. And again, for us, it's not rate design, it's pricing. So we have early bird pricing, on our system. And what's interesting is that as I mentioned, we have a whole population of rideshare drivers that are very price sensitive. Those guys actually, and gals, will get up early, and go charge their EVs at an off-peak rate to save a little bit of money. We also have a whole bunch of drivers that aren't very price sensitive, that all they care about is location, and they're going to pay more to charge on peak, and that's okay.
Rick, if I could just add real quick,
Please.
In regards to rate design, when you're exploring EV rate design and options, we're doing that within the distribution system planning and often including that in things like integrated distribution planning or even distributed energy resource planning. So to the point that San Diego Gas and Electric was making is that, there are a lot of different considerations, a lot of different options, and we're not just looking at this in a vacuum. We're looking at it from the larger picture.
Thank you, Rick. That's a great point. It sounds like the whole rate design topic is going to get a little more interesting with EVs, but for good reason. Sounds great. We hear a lot of dates here in California recently. We've got no more sale of gas-burning vehicles in 2035 and 2030 and different deadlines. So a lot of things coming up. So what's the difference of building out for 2040 than building for 2030? Anybody? Maybe you go, Kathy.
I'm happy to start there, I guess. They'll certainly, the other folks would be great to hear as well. But really, from our perspective, building for 2030 involves figuring out some of the fundamental questions, roles and responsibilities. For example, how much infrastructure should utilities be allowed to own? Which standards and protocols are going to be needed to enable managed charging? What should an initial suite of charging stations be located? Where should they be located? I think for 2040, we will have resolved those foundational questions and we'll be on to subsequent generations of equipment on all ends of the EV life cycle. We'll be focusing on filling in gaps and meeting ever-growing needs. But those are the kinds of challenges that we've collectively had a lot of experience overcoming. So I think it's the earlier years that are going to be more challenging.
Yeah, I don't want to add much more because I think you really said it well. I think when I think about 2030, I kind of think short-term and long-term. In the short run, we really have to figure out the interconnection process. We have to figure out how to incentivize customers. We have to figure out rules and regulations around all of these new technologies that we're going to attach to the grid. And that's all going to take time and conversation and partnership and debate. And that's the part that gets hard and lengthy, right, is the debate. Because we might agree on the solution at the end, but we probably don't agree on how to get there. And so when I think about 2030 and planning for the grid, it's having those tough conversations in a candid way, but with a goal of getting to the 2040, which is more of that, we've got it. We've got the rules, we've got the regulations, we've got the path, and now we just got to get the work done. And I know we'll get there. California has some audacious goals, but I think we have a lot of bright minds working on these problems, so I'm hopeful.
Kathy, you want to add anything?
Well, I do think, again, this is with my old general energy policy hat on and less about EVs. I do think as we're having the conversation about electrification of transportation and phasing out of internal combustion engines in California by the middle of the next decade, and what that means for 2040, we've got to get to long duration storage, right? Not just 3-hour storage of batteries, but what is the 5-day or 8-day or whatever going to swing resource to provide all of the electricity once all of our cars are EVs and all of our trucks. If we electrify everything, which I love environmentally and I love from an efficiency standpoint, we do need to pair that with a supply side that looks a little bit different and more two-way power flows, I think. So there's some system design stuff that when you start to go above 5%, 10% EVs, we're going to have to think about this whole system differently.
Well, thank you so much. Well, let me ask one more question, then we'll move into audience Q&A. We've recently had some new funding legislation. What do you guys believe some of those impacts might be? I'll let you go first, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a bit of money coming in, and there's a lot of opportunities there. You know, I can't try to guess what the impact might be, but there's a tremendous opportunity to do some things on the front end that I think will benefit us all. So, you know, some of the money is going to be focused on the siting of the charging. Some of it's going to be charging support. Some of the money will go to the utilities in certain circumstances, and that will, by necessity, engage us. But I just think this is a tremendous opportunity to get some of the important things done on the front end that I think will help facilitate moving to an electrified transportation system.
Great. Jenny?
Yeah, I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We will never see the amount of attention and money flowing into this space that we will in the next 5 to 10 years. And if your company is not figuring out how to play in this space, if your company isn't thinking about how does this dollars impact me or my customer, then you're doing yourself a disservice. I would immediately stop whatever you're doing, whatever your sales strategy is, whatever your customer strategy is, and I would understand these funding opportunities because this is going to be big. Because at the end of the day, at least in clean transportation, most of that funding is going to go to the end user, which is the customer. And I think Natasha and Carter made it very clear before, we're a facilitator of connecting those funds to the right people. And I think a lot of folks in this room can help do that as well through their products and services and their funding. Because the biggest barrier, we talk about mileage and range anxiety, but for our business customer, it's cost. These bidirectional chargers, they're expensive, right? These vehicles that you have to retrofit, go from gas to electric, they're expensive. And so all of the dollars that we can go to bring vehicles into our region, to bring down the cost of infrastructure, to help offset the cost of the transformer upgrade that a customer normally has to take care of, those are all dollars that are going to move mountains. And everybody should be thinking, how does that impact my business, my region? And every utility that I know of that's really thinking about this problem is digging into it. At the core, though, it's helping customers. And so what I would say is that the legislation funding is coming in. It's going to help customers make choices that they couldn't have. What I think will be interesting to watch, though, is how these legislative rules are being translated. They sometimes, and I'm not making a political statement, but sometimes they pick winners and losers. And so it will be interesting to see, as these different funding opportunities come into play, what is the different administrations showing hey, this is where we want to go with battery storage, or this is how we want to go with this composition, or we want to rebate these type of vehicles, but not these types of vehicles. And again, we're talking about electrification, but hydrogen, I mean, clean is clean. Clean fuels is clean fuels. You know, there's a big place for, especially for medium and heavy duty, to play in sort of this hydrogen space and really mimic sort of the operations of a traditional business customer. So just some things to think of, but it's definitely, if you're not thinking about it, I'm happy to talk with you afterwards, but it's gonna be a lot to do in the next couple of years.
Great. Kathy?
Oh, it's an enormous tailwind for clean energy. You know, I've been at this for a long time, so I'm super excited about the momentum. Look, the car companies are electrifying. They're already committed more than 500 billion, but this is going to make it go faster. Companies like EVgo are investing in infrastructure, but I only invest in the infrastructure where it'll pencil for my shareholders. Now there are many more geographies that can pencil. Right? So we really, well and truly, with this extra funding, will be able to enable electric for all much more quickly. So this is super, super exciting. And I think, you know, as a former policymaker, I think there's some really interesting, cool elements to the design that are aiming, Jenny, to not pick winners, but to instead say, we've got public policy objectives. We want to do the corridors first, so we create ubiquity on the charging side, create ubiquity. So, and then we'll actually allow the money to flow to other places, but here's what we want to do first. So I'm sure as we get into the implementation that we're going to find imperfections and there'll need to be amendments. But the fundamental design is, you know, address climate, create jobs, create jobs here in America, invest in innovation here in the United States. Like all of those things, I think, are part and parcel to what the package is. And I'm pretty excited about the implementation of it over the next few years.
It sure does sound exciting. Well, let's see if our audience has a few questions. If our team could help with a roving mic, that would be great. Any questions, everybody?
Come over here. Rick, right here.
Oh, great.
Yeah, hi, this is Nick from Chesapeake. As an investor of EVgo, 2 questions. What is your safety standards and who are your competitors?
Yeah, so the safety standards, all of our equipment is UL certified, and it goes through a rigorous sort of testing protocol before we actually commission anything. We specify, we don't just simply take technology. We have a set of specifications that vendors, the manufacturers of the charging equipment have to bid on, and then they get accepted, and then it goes through this process in our lab, even after it's UL tested. So that's what we do on safety. Who are competitors? The closest competitor in terms of business model is Electrify America, which is the subsidiary of Volkswagen that was created out of the Dieselgate scandal. They they have to invest $4 billion in creating charging infrastructure rather than paying a fine for the diesel emission problems that they caused. And so they've built out a network mostly historically on highway corridors in America, but now they're starting to build in urban areas not too distant from EVgo. So they're our single biggest competitor on the charging infrastructure, the fast charging infrastructure front. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. We've got a few more, Kathy.
James Barnes, City of Tallahassee. You spoke about the enormous amount of new funding that's going into the whole electric charging stations. It seems like that funds is being targeted for those that buy new and or used electric vehicles, and most certainly in the infrastructure. You also referenced the permitting side. I'm curious to see what's your thoughts about city governments and state governments that are now looking at building codes and permitting that will be looking at requiring new construction to have charging stations, commercial and residential, and how that will impact the landscape moving forward.
Oh, yeah. Look, there are a few jurisdictions that have already done that here in California. That when you're going to build a new office building or a new apartment building, you must have a certain number of charging stalls, and like that's actually a good thing to do. That is actually a good thing to do. I mean, I think you may have seen the same number I have come out of the administration in Washington, which is the objective is to get 500,000 new charging ports out there over the next, I don't know, 5-7 years. 500,000. Many of those will be level 2, those longer duration ones, which are perfect for apartment buildings or office buildings or hotels. But then some of them ought to be fast charging for people that are on the go. But I think the local government authorities requiring it, it's another opportunity to accelerate the deployment and meet these public policy objectives.
Okay. Let me see if we have any other questions. There's one back in the back.
So you mentioned apartment buildings. I live in this small city in New York called New York City, where we have a couple apartment buildings, and there's absolutely no incentive for apartment building owners to install EVs. So even if you wanted one, you couldn't get one. So is there anything that either EVgo is doing or San Diego is doing or the commission is doing to kind of incentivize that or try to solve that issue? I mean, there's probably more people in my block in New York City than there are in most towns in the country. But there's no way they're getting EVs if the people who own the apartment buildings are not going to be incentivized to install EV chargers. And I work for a utility.
Wait, do you work for Con Ed?
I work for New York Power Authority.
Oh, right, okay. We love New York City, but New York City is the hardest place for EVgo to build. Like, it is so hard. So, and again, but fast chargers require a lot more power than level 2s for apartment buildings. I mean, most of the apartment buildings are going to be just fine if you put in level 2 because it's overnight charging for the residents, right? EVgo is not in the business at this moment of providing, we don't have a business model for doing level 2s in apartment buildings, but ChargePoint, which is another public company that does charging infrastructure, does do a lot. And I think that there will be funding available either for ChargePoint as the supplier, as the vendor, or even for apartment building owners. There may be a way for apartment building owners to access some of that funding to support the cost of providing that amenity to the apartment dwellers. EVgo actually just did win a grant from the California Energy Commission to build fast charging in a multi-unit dwelling situation here in California. Because it's an experiment, because, you know, historically, mostly people thought of near apartment buildings, you want all night charging, but we're going to experiment and see if we put fast charging in and let the apartment dwellers take a half an hour rather than 6 hours to charge, is that a business model that can work? So there's lots of different opportunities that, again, keep your eye on it. And like, I would say to your body corporate or your homeowners association that we want charging. We want charging. But I'm also presuming that most of the people in New York City don't even own cars. Is that not right?
No, they're enough to block the traffic.
Any other questions, guys? Yeah. I have one more coming up, Kathy.
Just a quick question from the kind of regulatory standpoint, and kind of dovetailing off of his question about apartment complexes and multi-tenant situations. Is there legislation, you know, that you see coming down, you know, either here in California or even more broadly, that will more or less force the hand there? You know, whether it's you know, resistivity or on the part of the landowner, which I think will go away at some point because they'll be incentivized to have charging, you know, if they want tenants. But to kind of prime the pump, so to speak, is there, you know, to lower regulatory, maybe local restrictions? Is there something coming down that will kind of help, you know, move that along?
Yeah, look, my guess is that like the current legislation, all of the funding, it's a bunch of carrots rather than sticks. So I think we're trying to go with carrots right now. So to offer those carrots to the apartment building owners or the tenants or the utilities to have a program, or to the charge point providers to have the program. But if it doesn't happen, that enough charging infrastructure gets rolled out, then I'm guessing that the stick, the regulation to do it, will follow. Look, I live in an apartment building in Santa Monica that I rent. I have an EV. Because I'm not an owner, I don't have the power or authority to install the charging in my parking garage. So it's hard for me as a renter. So that's just, it will be. We do need more movement more quickly. I think the financial incentives coming from the IRA are going to help with that, I hope.
Okay, one more. We have time for one more if there's another question. All right. Well, I have just a comment to make. Number one, thank you all for today. This was a great conversation. Something tells me there'll be a lot happening in this space in the next 12 months. I hope you all come back next year. In preparing for the call, I've had quite a few chats with different tech companies, and it just seems like there's a lot of technology that's being developed to help monitor and manage the charging process, probably inside the car itself. Maybe we can have a conversation about that next year. But thank you all so much, and I hope you'll come back next year. Maybe we can all be in person. And what a great panel. Let's give a great hand for everybody. Thank you so much. Well, that concludes this session, and look forward to speaking with all of you soon. And we're going to take a little bit of a break and start a little cocktail hour, and then we're going to come back for our very first Icon Awards for our industry. And through our partnership with the Wall Street Journal, our award winners will be recognized in the Wall Street Journal in about 2 weeks. So come back in a few minutes, and we're going to have kind of a little cocktail. Bring your cocktail in with you. It's going to be a little fun, quick awards thing. And thank you so much. We'll see you shortly.